Andrea Morgan.
Holly, go out in the hall.
You need to read this.
Hey, everyone.
Oh, I forgot to do this. Andrea Morgan. Troy Albert. Okay. Tammy Herm. Yeah.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak with you. I'm Tammy Herm. I'm from Indiana Council of Administrators of Special Education, which also known as ICASE. I also represent Du Bois, Spencer, Perry, and Pike counties and the Special Education Co-op in Southwest Indiana. First, I want to say the current recommendations offer multiple options and pathways for a variety of students, while the options for non-college bound students are not as vast as those who plan to pursue post-secondary options. I want to acknowledge the collaboration that the panel has taken. I want to acknowledge the collaboration that the panel took as far as the many versions of the recommendations and how they changed from meeting to meeting, and so I appreciated that. But I do request on behalf of those directors of special education in Indiana that today the vote be no, and the no really being not yet. Because one of the comments yesterday was that they feel like the concerns are premature. Well, I have conflict with that because I feel like there are a lot of very valid concerns. First off, box number one, we keep talking about boxes. In House Enroll Act 1003, it specifically spells out the diploma to be the Core 40 diploma. We've heard discussions that our legislature is going to address our diploma issues during the session. Well, we're putting in a recommendation that you are voting on today on a statutorily recognized diploma from House Enrolled Act 1003, which is Core 40. That to me is not acceptable. We have too many questions that we have to figure out what is our statutorily recognized diploma that we're listing there. So I ask that we hold off on getting these recommendations going. Another comment that was when we look at premature, and when we're looking at funding. How can funding be a premature concern? How can we budget? How can we do anything? Right now it's Christmas time. If I let my kids go out and do my Christmas shopping and I say to them, oh, sure, get whatever you want, that's going to blow up my yearly budget because they're not going to hold the purse strings. So we have people saying they support this, but they don't hold the state purse strings. So they can verbally give us their support, but what are the implications going to be? That's not a premature concern. Another comment made was that we're going to tweak the plan as we go. Love that idea of tweaking, because nothing should ever be in stone. I'm a special educator. Nothing should ever be in stone. So when we're looking at tweaks, I don't think we're at the point where we can tweak. I think we're going to have kids who are hurt and harmed because we're going to find out that the tweaks that we need to make are going to have major impacts and implications on their futures because they're not going to be able to access a diploma. I find a yes vote on the current recommendations as premature. I think they have great potential, but again, the commitment, those people, our legislators here yesterday were saying they have a commitment, and CTE and the governor has a commitment to CTE. Great, those are verbal commitments, but they don't hold the purse strings and they don't have the day-to-day impact on people's budgets. So I ask of you to please be responsive to the public comments in the last several days in the panel meetings, the people who have come. We represent all students in Indiana, and as you vote, please consider the concerns that were brought to you: the cost, the capacity, the tracking, transient students, limited options for our non-college bound students. I find it, as the superintendent from Wayne Township said, irresponsible to vote yes today. Again, it's a not yet. As another gal said, let's pump the brakes. And the last thing I want to say is, I know many of the board members here served on that panel, and I think that you will earn a lot of respect from the field if you vote no, not yet, on the recommendations. And I don't know if I have any time left.
You have about a minute.
Okay. Dr. Bertram, you were asking about other people when they came up. Is there anything on these recommendations that you can't live with for the population of people that you represent? I'm here to represent those kids who struggle. And my biggest challenge in the thing that I can't live with or fear, yes, cost, all the things I mentioned, but when I'm looking at that pocket of children who struggle and they work and work and work and have to retake classes because they fail them, and they have to retake that English 9 and English 10 at the same time as their English 11, they're not going to have room for the options in the third box, the concentrated classes and things like that. So that's how it impacts the people I represent. Thank you all for your time.
Troy Albert.
Good afternoon.
Welcome back, Troy.
A lot of familiar faces. I come to you today as principal at Salem High School in Washington County, a small rural community, one of 3 high schools in our county. We happen to be the county seat, so we have a lot of this. I'm excited because I get the opportunity to lead with my heart. And I think that sometimes we forget that. As principals, we do lead with our heart. I started my year off by showing the Billy Hawkins story. And if you have not seen it, you need to watch it. And I identified to my staff the importance of finding Billy Hawkins in our hallways. Because teachers make a difference. People make a difference. Counselors make a difference. All the people I've heard on this are really concerned about the unknowns. I agree with the principal prior to me that is concerned about having that conversation in the last hours prior to graduation and not being able to allow somebody who has received all the requirements for a diploma but can't graduate high school. I really worry about that conversation and how that will go. I am concerned about the number of students that possibly would not get to graduate or be considered a graduate, and on what the fiscal and the social and emotional of my community will be. As I did the numbers, and I know I didn't have all the stuff that was there, but 134 graduates went to 69. And so we went from almost at 90% graduation rate down to 52. And again, I didn't have all the information in advance. I'm willing to work at whatever it takes to get those graduates. I've spoken to this before. A waiver is nice. And if there's a way to get a student a diploma based upon a waiver, it's going to happen, as long as it's done correctly and with the intent that it's supposed to be there. I continue to look at the local pathways. The unknowns are what's driving me nuts. And it's what we are trying to do as a school, is to find those things. The pathways for a third of my school will be fine. They would succeed whatever you do. The next third, they'll probably do okay. Some will struggle. But it's that bottom third that I represent today. I represent the transient students, as we are a mobile society. The number of students, I had 2 juniors walk in yesterday to finish the semester. We have 9 days left of the semester. I want to be able to have some more flexibility to be able to work with those, because even in our county, in the 3 counties, we have a strong ag population, and the 2 other schools may not have those type of things to work with. So that's open conversations with other schools, what we can do to help each other, but is that going to be enough? Is it going to get me every single school survived? I've had the conversations with my staff. What are the obstacles for us not to get more students academic honors? And started working on that end. I've worked at the other end. What are the careers then and the pathways that we can locally develop coming out of each of our department? My question would be, can we have school certificates? For example, I have an awesome science department, and I had a kid hired directly into a laboratory out of high school. And his reason is because he was able to use superior equipment in high school, in the labs, and can we do a lab certification at the local level? Because I think those are things that we do, and we do well. I wanted to tell you, too, my philosophy of high school. High school is an opportunity for students to experience a whole bunch of things and find their pathway. It's kind of a shotgun approach. We kind of shoot the shotgun into the wall and have a bunch of opportunities as every student leaves. What this does is make it a sniper rifle. I'm afraid it's going to limit us to where each student has one thing. And I will tell you this, in high school, I thought I would be a baseball player for the rest of my life. That didn't work. In college, I thought I was going to be a CPA and take care of business. My junior year, I became a teacher because I wanted to help others learn. And I'm still doing that today as a principal. I want to be with my students, and I miss that today. So I hope that you understand my vision and mission is to have all students have opportunities. Please make that happen. Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
I have a question for Troy. Troy, you mentioned the bottom third that may have more challenges if Pathways is adopted. Do you think that under the Pathways model that we're working off of now, that there would be an increase in engagement with that bottom third, maybe even earlier on in their schooling, to help them deal with those possible graduation challenges from what we're doing with them with that bottom third now?
I would say no, because I'm going to tell you we're pushing them right now as high as they possibly can be.
Well, of course, it's your
My issue is I'm going to be that one that brings the special ed pathway to you to approve. And I'm going to get it done because I'm going to get it done for all my children. And I'm going to make it happen. But it's going to take me having the rules and the regulations. I am thankful for the opportunity to have a little bit of time to work on that. But I will tell you this, expect a lot of local pathways coming to your attention. I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of us doing different individual packages to meet those Billy Hawkins of the world.
Well, I think that's the expectation, and I, as one member, look forward to that because I think the whole system relies upon local control and local pathways coming as creative as you want to be with it.
Have you ever seen that Don't Quit with the stork and the frog hanging out of it, and he's still beating on the stork to try to get away? That's what we're going to do.
Hold on, when do you watch all this stuff? I'm just kind of curious. No, is your
Netflix.
I know. I'm not sure where it's at. I have just a couple quick questions for you.
All right.
Along those lines, and I want to concur with Dr. Walker. I think my hope, and I understand the uncertainty around the locally created pathways, and actually I want there to be that uncertainty. The more certainty we create, the more bureaucracy we create, and the more limiting we are to those pathways. I want just the opposite. I want us to open that up, to allow that creativity, innovation to happen at the school level. But I do understand that fear. Again, my fear is that we create too many restrictions around it. rather than opening it up. Because I think there are some legitimate pathways where, and I've heard things like fine arts. What does that pathway look like? You know, and I think when you compare it to other options, I think we can create a lot of pathways and a lot of opportunities. I think one thing we have heard that I also hope happens is that we create pathways, and we only have to approve a pathway once. It approved, now it's open to everyone. And we share that across the state.
But it has to be exact, and that, to me, is a real concern, because I can't make it exactly what is in other schools.
No, but I think there are some ways to do that. I think there are ways, I mean, you could take one school, let's say, that has this extensive fine arts program, and they may have a lot more in their pathway than a school that doesn't have all those opportunities. But I do think if we approve the former, we could do some kind of baseline approval to say, here's what the minimum. You might extend beyond that, but here's the minimum that may be accessible to everyone. So but there's a lot, I understand there's uncertainty, but I have one other question for you, and I've heard this a number of times. I want to be clear about. You talked about the difference. You said you took your 130 graduates, then you looked at that class and put them in these pathways and found that your graduation rate would have declined significantly, correct? That is simply because of those students did not meet these requirements today.
Correct.
Not to say that those students will not meet those requirements in the future, or
Correct.
the next group of students, right? Given change in requirements and so forth. So the idea that a graduation rate would immediately drop by 30, 40%, that's not accurate.
I just know that you had to start, because one of the things that I had to do, I had to put a face to this process.
Sure.
And the thing is, because I believe that that's the most important thing. That's my heart saying that, not on paper. This looked great when I first looked at it. It looked great. It had the paper test. It passed that. Where it didn't pass for me was in the personal point, where I picked one person. And I will speak. My son is going to graduate from Purdue in May. And he went and he did the manufacturing path for 2 years before he went to Purdue University. But he needed to figure it out for himself, what he really wanted to do. And I will tell you this, he would have fell through the cracks in this program because he wasn't a great test taker. So, you know, there are those stories, and those are the ones that you got to also hear.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So locally created pathways, do you foresee changing current practice or using what you already have that's existing to create pathways?
Both.
So what are you concerned about when you have to, I mean, what are the concerns if you are taking non-existing resources to create new pathways?
Well, like even in the fine arts, because we had that discussion the other day, we have some very talented kids that in a small school, that's one of your electives that you have, and we would really encourage them to stay in that program for 4 years. What would it look like for them? And I will tell you this, they aren't going to be music majors in college, but they have that broad experience and that working together and all the soft skills that you were asking us to do. But what they could do is do portfolios and different things at the end to be evaluated. And I have the success story from our drama department. I received yesterday, a former graduate is starring on Broadway in a play right now. So those are things that aren't in this, would be a local type pathway to me. Making that connection.
Courses, existing opportunities, and package those.
Yes.
So you really aren't adding more opportunities, more experience. I mean, you're taking existing and you're going to package them.
Advance them.
Got it. Thank you.
Make sense?
Yes, thank
A
you.
student could go through that fine arts pathway and meet requirements 2 and 3.
Right.
Project-based experience, and so they're doing drawing and 2D art, 3D art, portfolio. They've met both requirements.
Then I have a
But
senior
they-
right now that has a granite piece of out in the lot and working on making a lion. So he is hand chiseling every day. So, I mean, there's a lot of good stuff that goes on. We just need to package it and make sure that we do it. But again, to me, I see that as individual pathways for one kid. So it's a lot of time and effort, and it's going to be a lot of work on some people. I'm hoping that this Ivy Tech has the job coach stay around, because that could be some of their responsibilities as well.
Thank you.
Andrea Morgan with Jordan Steiner on deck. Andrea Morgan. Right, Jordan Steiner with David Mogul on deck.
Glad you could pronounce my name. I have just a brief comment, because superintendents and principals have a little bit more weight on their shoulders. As a school counselor, I have other responsibilities and pressures on me. But again, I would thank you for this opportunity. It's being transparent and been open to do this, so I appreciate that. I'm a high school counselor. I'm a father of 2. I am encouraged by this process, this movement to focus best practice to prepare future and current Hoosiers. I'm new to the profession, but I feel like this is innovative in and of itself. The language to remove the graduation qualifying exam, to increase career readiness, to increase employability skills, increase social emotional development, and to engage communities and to build citizenry, those are all positives. The demonstrative collaboration, and I'm just going to list a few. The ESSET meetings, I met some of you at those. Chamber reviews, Lilly Initiative, Commission of Higher Education reports, Indiana Career Council reports, DWD and beyond. People care about this. Concerns, grave, great, but at a surface level. Rigorous diploma. We've demonstrated a shortage of qualified teachers now, and 25% when retirees, it is demonstrated. Also in 2022, the dual credit credential deadline. The employability skills component, cuts to athletics, performing arts and fine arts like we just heard, lack of access to CTE programs statewide, co-op opportunities, ROTC programs that are dynamite that wouldn't be able to graduate. We haven't heard that yet. Same thing with JAG and AmeriCorps, work-based learning restrictions and not having opportunities there. 100% on the apprenticeship opportunities, but we don't have that today. The post-secondary competencies, just simply based, people are plugging this into a formula that's not guaranteed, but the graduation numbers are significantly down. Just taking the 89% graduation rate, taking out those that didn't graduate, and also the general diploma requirements is 25%. That's 20,000 students across the state that would not graduate.
Pardon me, taking out what? Repeat that, please.
Out of the IDOE Compass, you take out 89% graduation rate, so 11 didn't graduate. Of those that did, 13% had a general, so 25% would not fulfill these current pathways that are being proposed. And that's about 20,000 students. Record keeping. As a school counselor, we have an average of 600 to 1 ratio. Record keeping, keeping track of these students. We had talked about employers trying to find qualified candidates, high demand for education. School counselors need a master's degree, and they are charged with making sure our Hoosier students graduate and meet the expectations and have to have that conversation. Day-to-day challenges, you didn't meet them because of what is laid out today. Accountability, reduce the fighting for per pupil money, Perkins money. Instead of working together, we have collaboration, but the reality and the battlefield aren't aligning. I kind of was interested in this format. There are only 7 states that have a rigorous diploma and a service component or a competency. There's only one, and it's not a state. Washington, D.C. is the only system that has a rigorous diploma and mandatory competencies. Only 79% of their K through 12 is public education. They have the lowest percent of public education students. Indiana, to compare, is 87% of the K through 12 students are public education students. And those are just numbers. But there are models out there that have been successful. I don't know if this was to catch superintendents by blindside or we're just that far behind. I don't know how long we've known we've been behind, but there are models out there in other states that have been successful that meet our state. Iowa, Wisconsin, Missouri, Maryland all have great programs and models that are similar to this. Like, we're not trying to throw this out. But the baseline of those successful programs, they have a general diploma with an opt-in option and some local decisions on service components. They have an individualized learning portfolio, an ILP, and they have a comprehensive student services model. Indiana does not. Money, important issue. If we could take ISTEP money that we invest and we redirect some of that to CTE programs, building and technology infrastructure, teacher professional development, athletics, performing arts and co-ops, and then also a robust student services model.
30 seconds.
And I think 30 seconds is enough to get through this. Michael Rebel from the Center of Educational Equity said, we have to think about how to give kids a meaningful education. We have to give students quality teachers, small class sizes, and up-to-date equipment. But in addition, if we're serious, we have to do this to overcome the damages of poverty. We have to meet their needs, their mental health needs, after-school programs, summer programs, parent engagement, early childhood services, these so-called wraparound services. If we're serious, we have to think that not add-ons, but imperative. 48% free and reduced across the state. 51% of public education students are free and reduced. It's beyond trying to get people through and trying to benefit our Hoosier students and learners. Thank you.
David Mogul, shoot. And then last call for Andrea Morgan. If she is not here, Faye Robbins, you're on deck. Oh, I am sorry.
I thought that was me. I was going to say good morning, but it's good afternoon already. My name is Dave Margle. I serve the principal of a 4-star A-rated school in Northwood High School in Napanee, Indiana. We are a rural school, and if you travel our highways, you will have to pass buggies on a daily basis. So that tells you that we take it to the next level, I think, with rurality. And I think Brace the Pace is the theme of Napanee, so that kind of also tells you how we go about business. I've been honored to earn the Indiana National Presidential Award for Excellence in Teaching of Mathematics and Science in the state of Indiana from 1999 to 2002. I also was honored to be the District 2 Principal of the Year for 2010, 2013, and 2016, and was honored with the High School Principal, Indiana High School Principal of the Year in 2016. And I say that just to kind of give you some background on my passion with education. I'm going to go completely off script here because I think this is important for you guys to know this too after I just kind of patted myself on the back. There was this rural kid in Ohio who was born to a lower income family whose parents didn't go to college. Dad worked hard in the service industry. Mom stayed at home, had a part-time job on the weekend. 2 sisters and a brother. Never any of us had any opportunity to really think about college, but for some reason that door opened because of educators for me. I had a guidance counselor. I had coaches. I had other people that intervened and said, you know what, you can change your path. And then it came to taking the entrance exams into college. And to this day, my kids do not know what I scored on the ACT because I'm embarrassed. It would not have been a score that would be accepted in this pathway. I would never have been able to achieve some of the things that I have achieved in my life if this pathway exists currently the way it is. The highest math class I ever took was trigonometry when I was in high school. I didn't even have calculus and I was a math teacher. I was in remedial English when I went to college because I had to get caught back up. And that's one of the things that I noticed yesterday. My wife, it was my birthday yesterday, and we were coming home from a meal that she was so kind to let me have. And she noticed I was quiet on the ride home. And she asked me, what are you thinking about? I noticed you're so quiet. And I said, I'm thinking about my fifth period class that I experienced yesterday. I sat in a fifth period algebra 1 class to observe the teacher, a veteran teacher, who the majority of the students in that class had IEPs and the others were struggling in mathematics. There was a special ed teacher that was also a part of the assistants. I saw that teacher pull out every stop in the book. Everything he had in his tool belt, he pulled out. He did peer discussion. He did manipulations of different figures. He allowed them to ask questions and backwards progress through problems. He did everything he could possibly do to get these kids to understand the substitution method when studying systems of equations. And he was excited. I could tell he was excited that he got these guys to understand this. He was excited about it. And so at the end, like we all practice, there's got to be a closure activity to figure out where their level of understanding is. And he asked for feedback. And less than half of the class understood anything he said. And I was like, man, what else could he have done? You know, I think sometimes what we're talking about here is you don't think that educators are putting the effort into these kids. We are. Yesterday, I followed one kid to every single one of his classes because he has been sneaking out of our building and going wherever. And when I call his parents, they tell me, we'll worry about it when he gets home tonight. And then when we ask for a child study, they won't come in because it costs them money. I didn't think I was going to be talking about that at-risk population today, but I found myself being that. And the reason why I'm bringing this up to you is because if we don't take the time to look at these pathways from that eye, you won't have the principal of the year talking to you. You're going to have this nice little box that everyone starts out in their freshman year, and this is your lane. Stay in your lane. And that opportunity to go outside that lane is going to be limited. It's going to be limited. I was lucky. I had two parents. They expected the most out of me. They expected me to work probably more than anything. But I had two parents. And that's not this population. And I know it's controversial to talk about, but that's not real. What's real is these kids, I have 5 students right now whose dads are not in the picture, who refuse to do anything in my building. I've met with them numerous times to try to get through to them, and they say they just don't care. And every single one of them have tested high enough on ISTEP to be eligible to do well. So we have a bigger issue here. And we're putting a lot of efforts into these pathways, but don't forget that population, because I think it's going to be a major mistake. Thank you.
Andrea Morgan, last call. Last call, Andrea Morgan. All right. Faye Robbins, followed by John Hunter.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity, for the hard work and thoughtful work that you've put into this, for the panel and to the board. For all of our students in Fort Wayne Community Schools who are academically strong and or those with good support systems, as was just mentioned, this proposal will not impact them negatively or positively. We already offer APIB dual credit, PLT, or Project Lead the Way, ACT, SAT, ASVAB. We offer all of those certifications, internships. If the intent is to increase rigor, better preparation, we agree, because we are doing this in many ways already. If the intent is the realization that college is not the only option for success, we agree with that as well. But we ask then, why is the exam that's being recommended for school accountability one that was designed or intended to not to be a gatekeeper for a high school diploma, but was designed to determine a student's success in college? The basic entry-level key for college, the military, a job, or any other opportunity after high school is a diploma. Pathways that come with doors that are unable to be opened for students not represented in this proposal are basically pathways to nowhere. are children with struggles and challenges beyond their making, choosing, or ability. Those who struggle now to work in support of their families while still in high school, those who lack supports at home, already find it difficult to meet the current requirements, and they may become the unintended consequence. They are the ones, along with all the other students, that as educators we seek to do no harm. They are the ones whose faces we see, frustrations we feel, and stories that we hear. All of the ones that need to feel, all of these students need to feel that there is hope for obtaining a rigorous and well-earned diploma that will be the key that opens those doors and pathways. We at Fort Wayne Community Schools believe in rigor. We believe holding students to high standards and agree with reasonable, fair, and equitable accountability. We also believe that as adults, we have voluntarily agreed to take on the role of ensuring equity and that all students are afforded every opportunity for success. We are obligated to keep them center and foremost because they are not widgets, they're children. On their behalf, we need to collectively listen, look at the data and research, listen to expertise, visit and see what is truly happening in the schools, and listen to the student's voice. A couple of years ago, I had a millennial colleague of mine mention a word, Sonder, S-O-N-D-E-R. And the definition of that is the realization that each random passerby is living a life as vivid and complex as our own. We ask that you sonder, and we ask that you hear the challenges of all the students we serve, considering unintended consequences of this proposal so we do no harm. I thank you for the efforts and support, and we look forward to continuing working to develop a process that takes into consideration what is best for the future of all of our students. Thank you.
John Hunter, followed by Carol Oslander.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to address you on graduation pathways. And more importantly, thank you for the important role you play each and every day on behalf of the children across the state of Indiana. Although many hours have gone into creating these graduation pathways, I would offer that not enough time has occurred to consider the true financial implications of these pathways and what that implication will be on our schools across the state of Indiana. Currently, I serve as the superintendent of the Rural School Corporation in Porter County, Indiana, Union Township School Corporation. In 2016-2017, our school corporation was an all-A school corporation in the state of Indiana. Our I-STEP scores were in the top 15 in the state of Indiana. As I look at these pathways, I'm not talking about those 80 or 85% of my kids because they're going to find multiple pathways to graduate. But I'm here to talk today about those kids that I'm the most concerned about, those kids that are in the bottom 10 or 15%. Because, you know, as I've heard this morning talk about the pathways that are available in box 3, if you will, that talk about the ability to be CTE concentrators or to go out and get certifications. Our kids can do that. Our bottom 10 or 15% of kids can do that. However, if they don't have a Core 40 diploma in box 1, they don't graduate under this current plan. So I'm concerned about that. We have no waiver process currently. There will be no general diploma under these pathways as I understand them. That's going to eliminate them from graduation, regardless of whether we can do a locally created pathway or not. Secondly, I'm concerned about the financial resources that this current plan is going to take on schools. In my district, I will have to hire an additional person, probably costing, as I estimate it, $80,000 to do the tracking of this, to make sure that every one of our kids has completed an employability skill. And to ensure that we have students that move in late in their high school career, that they are able to also meet those needs. I'm concerned about the additional staff it's going to take me if we have an ACT or an SAT. Currently, many of my kids take that, And for those kids that are going to take either ACT or SAT, we do a preparation course for. If I now have to provide that for all of my students, that's going to be additional staff. I'm also concerned about our CTE. In Porter County, Indiana, we have currently 200 kids on a waiting list to get into our vocational program. We estimate that there's really 400 out there. We're concerned about how we're going to meet the needs of those kids. As Porter County superintendents, we recently met with our local Ivy Tech to find out how they might help us in this endeavor. And what we learned was currently they have no capacity to meet the needs of all those kids. So our concern is, while that is available to us, and we know that Ivy Tech wants to be a partner, currently there is no capacity to meet all the kids in Porter County. That's my concern about these graduation pathways. Thank you.
Just one point, I want to be clear. This plan does not change the diplomas or the graduation requirements for the diploma in any way. It doesn't require Core 40 for everyone. We still have the general diploma available as well as the current diploma structure.
It's my understanding that 1009 outlines the recognized diploma as Core 40. Is that not true?
That is not true. If I can point to you to the statute, in the part of the statute it says, except as provided in sections 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 of this chapter. Section 7 specifically refers back to previous code that keeps the general diploma exception upon a parent's request to exempt. So general diploma under this plan is still included because it's based on current statutory language.
So we heard from Representative Baining yesterday and Senator Cruz a commitment to look at figuring out a solution because of also, does that count in accountability? Does it not with the general diploma? The other concern is beyond the general diploma is the waiver. So
Right.
that has not been defined in
Right.
this.
Okay. Thank you.
And I think to that point, one of the reasons it came up yesterday was because of the federal government's definition
Correct.
around graduation requirements, which is a separate issue but one of equal concern.
Absolutely.
How it's defined in the state. Because now, as you know, our general diplomas are excluded from the federal definition.
Under ESC.
So the concern then is how do we resolve that?
Correct.
So,
Correct.
separate issue from this.
But to reiterate, my colleague Patrick McAllister has stated this several times, under Indiana statutory law, general diplomas do mean a student has graduated with an Indiana recognized high school diploma under our state law, not under federal law. Federal law won't have that
Right.
included in grad rate. Under state law, general diplomas still count, and this is written based on state law.
But in all transparency, that assumes we have 2 accountability systems.
Correct.
So if we go to 1, concerns.
Yes.
So, and also 1003's language is very confusing. We had people deep dive into that, ask several people for clarification, because you're correct. That number 2 in 1003 clearly states they have to hit Core 40 courses and requirements.
Right.
And so we did get clarification from Representative Baining and Senator Cruz, both confirmed yesterday, that they don't have intentions yesterday of doing anything to that piece of it. So, but the waiver part is still not been determined.
And we have a number of kids that require that waiver.
Thank you.
All right. Steve Thalmeyer? He's from Fairfield Schools. I said Carol. Carol, you're up. With Steve on deck. I'm sorry. Lunch has thrown me off. I apologize.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Carol Auslander, and I serve as the Vice President of the Indiana Chamber of Commerce. We have over 25,000 members and investors in all 92 counties, representing over 4 million Hoosiers. I am an appointed member to the State Workforce Innovation Council. I served on the Work Ethics Certificate Task Force. I've served on the High School Diploma Task Force, and I'm also pleased to have served as one of the Graduation Pathway Task Force voting members. I serve on a lot of task forces. I was one of the 13 supportive votes for this collaborative plan. And as a voice of the employers, I want to thank all of you, the state board staff, and my fellow task force members, and Dr. Ernest for the extraordinary amount of time and energy that has been spent on this extremely important endeavor. As you know, employers have an important stake in K-12 education. We pay half the taxes, and we are the end users. And I hear all the time from my employer members from across the state, we have a serious lack of a skilled workforce. Our annual Indiana Chamber Employer Survey for this year found that 47% of employers left jobs unfilled due to underqualified candidates. 53% of employers state that they plan to grow their business and increase their size of their workforce in the next 12 to 24 months. A significant number are expecting retirements in the next 5 years. 59% say that the supply of qualified applicants does not meet the demand, and these numbers have increased significantly over the past few years. So what does this tell us? It tells us that the status quo is not working. The status quo is not enough. Dr. Ernest asked the task force from day one what our goal was for this Pathways project, and my answer was simple and consistent throughout the entire process. I wanted to ensure that whatever blueprint we created provided currency for the students post-graduation. I coined the phrase Diploma Plus. I wanted every student to have a high school diploma plus some sort of dual credit, an industry-recognized certification, or work-based learning experience. Because what employers are saying is that high school diplomas are simply not enough to achieve the goals of having a living wage job. Indiana currently ranks 42nd in the country in post-secondary attainment, and we are nowhere near the goal of 60% of Hoosiers having some sort of post-secondary education. And the good paying jobs of today and the future simply require more than just a high school diploma. There have been many that have testified over the weeks and months, and today it's been to that employers simply need warm bodies that can pass a drug test. And I'm here to tell you that that may be what they want, but they need, similar to what you heard an employer speak from today. What is true is that in this economic climate with unemployment numbers in the 2 to 4% range, we are considered at full employment. And right now employers are struggling and desperate to fill their jobs. But employers would rather have employees that are ready to work on day one, instead of taking the significant amount of time and resources to have to train them. These students today simply are not ready. Many who testified before me have stated, who is this plan really for? And I'll let you in on a little secret. While I'm here to represent the employer community, I'm also here as a mom of 2 school-aged children. So who is this plan really for? I believe that this plan before you was drafted with students in mind, when we spent countless hours studying and drafting and collaborating. Because Hoosier students, including mine, deserve to have a rigorous K-12 education that will lead to a meaningful, well-paying job, and hopefully not staying in my basement. The Indiana Chamber fully supports the plan before you today and encourages your support. The business community is ready to step up and make investments and partner with K-12 education as a reality. I thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I want to just comment. I've heard a couple of times Diploma Plus, and I heard that throughout the process. I just want to be clear, most of this information in box 2 and 3 fall within the diploma. So I just think it's confusing at times and somewhat misleading when we're saying Diploma Plus, when the majority of it falls within the current diplomas. So I just want to make that point.
Thank you very much.
How do you anticipate bringing businesses together to help us create these kind of opportunities for students?
Well, I visit with businesses all across the state as part of my job, and when they come to me with, we're struggling to find a workforce, my first question is, how can I put you in touch with, are you in touch with your K-12 schools? Can I put you in touch with the superintendent? Are you hosting job fairs? How are you engaged in your community? And that is what the Indiana Chamber has taken upon themselves to try to be that connector and that collaborator between the business community and the education community.
You believe we could do this at scale?
I do. I do. I think there's a need. I think there's a demand. And I think partners on both sides would like to make this happen.
One other point, and really just you made the statement that employers are looking for people who are ready to go on day one, and we see this, right? They're not. even when we look at training budgets across companies, we've seen major declines. There are geography imbalances as well, right? I mean, there are a lot of reasons why we don't connect the workforce with employers. Not just a one-to-one within a single community, but, you know, we have a disproportionate number of jobs that may be in any geographic region of the state, correct?
Absolutely.
I mean, so you have an RV industry that needs a work, or enough people in that geography to meet that demand. So how do we address some of those challenges of really connecting a skilled workforce with the employer need and where their jobs are at?
Well, I think we've talked about the brain drain of students moving out of the state, our Hoosier students moving out of the state. I think that our conversation is now shifting to so many of our smaller communities. People are moving to the more urban and suburban communities and out of some of these more smaller and rural schools. So it's almost a brain drain within our smaller rural areas of our state, and that's something that we've been studying and looking at here at the Indiana Chamber as well. I'm not sure that I have the answer, but it's something that we are very cognizant about and something that we are very interested in trying to find solutions.
Yeah, hi, Carol.
Hi, Dr. Yeager.
Well, there's a book out, and I can't remember the title of it, but I'll get it to you. And it talks exactly about what you're talking about is the draining of people, small town, rural, and where it goes. But I'll get it to you. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty good one. Earlier in your comments, you said serious lack of, and I missed what you said at the end of that.
Serious lack of.
It's like in your first 30 seconds or so.
I'm going to pull this up for you. Lack of a skilled workforce.
Okay, thank you. I missed that part of it. You talked about retirements across the state, and as I stated earlier, it's the same world that educators live in, and we're trying to find, particularly in specific areas. So we concur with that, and we understand that, and not sure what to do about that, but keep on working and fighting just like you guys are.
School districts are employers too. I'm very well aware of that.
Say that again, please.
School districts are employers too. So it's when I'm talking about the employer community, I'm including school districts.
Okay. 3.75% employment, somebody mentioned that earlier, so everybody who wants to work is working. And I'm not sure, we all have the same issues, the same problems, and trying to find qualified people with those soft skills. So I get that. It kind of concerns me when the chamber, one of the results was training, and the employers don't want to have to train people. Isn't that something we all do? Is when we get a teacher straight out of college with 4 years of experience in college, and whatever their effort may be, their interest may be, we still have to train them, and we still have to nurture them, and we still have to provide them with every bit of education that we possibly can after they've come from universities. Not blaming universities, because we have standards, similar standards across the state and some different, but those standards that we have to expect from those employees, certified, classified, it's our responsibility to train them and to get them to where they need to be. I would assume that would be the same responsibility for the employers across the state.
Absolutely, and I apologize if you misunderstood my statement. Of course, employers are going to train. Many of them have specialty training courses and things that they need, but what we're hearing from employers is that the students that are coming to them are missing skills. We are lacking skills, and those are some of the things that are being hard to train them. They're training them currently, but it's taking up a lot of time and resources, and then these are things that they feel should be, they should already have these skills through their K-12 education.
Yeah, I don't think I misunderstood you because I wrote it down as a direct quote. And here's what else I want to say is we want to work with you, not against you. And I would hope that the chamber would be willing to work with educators.
Well, if you heard my last statement, I said we're willing to work with any partner that's willing to. We welcome the opportunity.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Madam Chair. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
The statistics that we've heard about unfilled jobs, unqualified workforce, sort of creates an impression, at least in my mind, that there are jobs that somehow employers can't fill. Is there a distinction to be made based upon the kinds of jobs we're talking about? I just can't imagine we're talking about high value-added jobs or high-tech jobs. Those jobs are being filled, right?
There are many of them that are not being filled. We are hearing from many of our tech members that they could hire 1,000 coders today if they had the skilled workforce available. So,
are those statistics limited to the hiring of Indiana residents, or are we talking about just hiring of anyone? For instance, Columbus has one of the highest populations of H-1B visa employees in the country. A couple years ago, they were number one per capita in the country. So with a global workforce, a global marketplace, people are willing to come from all over the world to come work in our state for high-paying jobs and good jobs. So in my mind, the issue isn't not only the employability of our students, but their competitiveness against a global workforce and against other educational systems, which, as draconian as you may think some of the stuff we're talking about is, where they go much harder. I mean, I visit China regularly, and through their education system, there's no comparison.
I would agree with you wholeheartedly, sir, and I would say that was why it's also the Chamber's mission to make sure that we have a very strong tax and business climate culture here in Indiana so that businesses want to move here and so that we can try to get skilled workforce from all over the country and all over the world. Get the best and brightest to move here and stay here.
So thank you for that. I just wanted to make sure that we're not looking at this in a vacuum. That is, we have to talk about what we're doing in the context of what is going on in terms of global education and the mobility of the global labor force. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You mentioned that employers feel that there's a deficit of skills in our graduates, and I'd be curious to know specifically what skills they're missing.
We asked that question in our employer survey for the past couple of years, and the resounding responses were on soft skills.
So we have a section 2, I believe, in the plan to address those soft skills. Do you feel confident that the proposal as is for number 2 section is adequate to potentially lead to a workforce that would meet that particular demand by employers?
Do I think it's going to solve the problem? I think it's a step in the right direction. I think this is part of a process. I've been very involved in the governor's work ethics certificate program, and I think that's an excellent framework. And we had many discussions in our pathway committee meetings on how to make that part of a pathway, and so I'm very pleased that that was put in there. But I think that we have a ways to go on some soft skills developments for our students.
So it's a good first step, you're saying?
Absolutely.
The other question I had is the governor has promoted in his plan the workforce development for the entire state, and I see this plan fitting into a whole puzzle of different things that governor has planned. From the employer perspective, from the chamber's perspective, is this plan that's being proposed, if we were to approve it, is that aligned with the governor's plan, and will it chamber priorities?
Absolutely. We've been engaged with the governor's office since day one of his administration on letting him know employer priorities and how we have our own strategic plan, our Indiana Vision 2025, that sets up 36 strategic goals and how to move them forward with data information that backs it. And so that's a lot of some of the data between our strategic plan and our employer survey that we've provided to the governor's office and his staff on trying to work together collaboratively on a strategic workforce plan.
So from a statewide perspective, we're trying to create a systems approach to policy change, and you're working in one direction, and the governor has set his priorities, and this plan, if we approve it, is again one component of a larger systems approach to moving forward Indiana in pretty dramatic ways. Is that an accurate statement?
I would not speak for the governor's office, but as speaking for the employer community, yes, I think that we're lockstep and moving in the right direction. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Just to reinforce, the schools have to provide for professional development at our expense. So do the businesses across the state. And we all need to pony up and get ready to do that. And it's not the public school's responsibility to figure out what each company wants, but to get those, and we're talking about the same skills, Carol, you and I are talking about the same skills, but to somehow get that bucket of skills together for no matter where those kiddos are going. But thanks for your comments.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
Thalheimer and Stacy Schmidt on deck.
Good afternoon, members of the board, and thank you for the opportunity to address you. My name is Steve Thalheimer, and I have the privilege of serving as the superintendent of Fairfield Community Schools in southeastern Elkhart County. I appreciate the time that's been spent on and the promise contained in the graduation pathway panel's examination of pathways, and I was hopeful because of the conversations about flexibility and serving all students. However, the proposal as presented falls short of this promise. In my remarks, I hope to share with you a snapshot of students who would be challenged or even harmed by the graduation pathways as currently presented and interpreted in its current form. Looking at the 2017 graduation class cohort, we had nearly 150 graduates. 36 of those students would not graduate under the current proposed pathways. Our graduation rate would drop from 94% to 76% based on that. 9 of those students earned a general diploma, and the clarification earlier was helpful to understand what would be in place for them. One was close at the ACT benchmark as presented in the draft. 10 students had SAT scores between 1,000 and 1,100, falling short of that benchmark, and my understanding is that that would fluctuate from year to year as it would be set by those testing institutions. While we have advocated locally for all of our students to try to attain at least 2 dual credit classes during their time in high school, we had several who had not obtained 3 or who had not attained 1 of their courses in a core area. 15 of those students who didn't meet the benchmarks of the pathway have earned credits in CTE but not in concentrator areas or as a completer. 5 of them are special needs students. 1 transferred to us as a senior. Many of them are CD students. You look at their historical grades, and they're consistently CD students. 1 suffered a concussion, and 1 struggled with severe anxiety. I always thought the discussion about pathways would better ensure that these students would graduate, but as it has unfolded, we now have a system where we would consistently worry about a quarter of our students on the margins not graduating for a variety of reasons. With what is currently in place, we as a district, and many of the districts here today, have pushed for work-based experiences, the work ethic certificate, promotion of dual credits, and early college. So we already have a mixture of local options that provide for student pathways. The new system will actually prove more restrictive. Without knowing many of the pieces that have yet to be fleshed out, and without a clear determination about the general diploma, although it's been clarified some, the proposed model is fraught with uncertainty for students and their families. Because the promise of flexibility and greater success are lost under what was proposed, I urge the State Board to vote against this proposal and to allow more time for the discussion of details, ramifications, and unintended consequences. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Stacy Schmidt, and I'm the superintendent at Porter Township School Corporation. I'm also fighting a cold, so I hope my voice doesn't give out somewhere in here. Porter Township is just south of Valparaiso, and we have 1,400 students in our school community. I appreciate the hard work that the panel has done. I especially appreciate the idea of pushing rigor and excellence in education in Indiana. I think one thing we can all agree on here is that that is a goal for our state and something that will benefit all of our students. My greatest concerns are that you may today entertain a proposal without the full understanding of all the details that it entails. We don't yet have a grasp of all of the financial components and implications of the plan, nor do we have a plan for how we're going to pay for this. The details have yet to be worked out, and there are many conversations left to be had. Hope. Hope that details are going to be worked out. Hope that the financial costs are going to be covered. Hope is not a strategy that's good enough for our students in Indiana. Think about a problem in your life that you faced and think about how you solved it. I don't know about you, but I don't like to fail. So just recently, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. So my family had the choice to make a plan. We had to make a plan for how we were going to deal with this. So we sought out the best experts in the field, the best experts in medical oncology, the best experts in a breast surgeon, the best experts in radiologists. We look for the experts to help us create a treatment plan that was tailored to my mom's specific cancer, and a treatment plan that was going to treat to cure, not just treat that particular type of breast cancer. This is what we have to do in Indiana. We have to get the experts around the table to look at what is needed for our students. Shouldn't that same attention to detail, that same attention to excellence, be what we demand for our most precious things, our kids? This is what I'm asking you for. This is what I would ask that you do. I don't think today is the day to vote yes on this. As you've heard before, I'm not saying that tomorrow or 6 months from now isn't. What I'm asking is that we look at the details, we look at the plans that are needed in order to make this successful for the most important things in our state, our kids. And most of all, I would ask that you let us be part of that plan. Just like we sought out for my family, the experts in the area that we needed, the practitioners. We didn't pick just any surgeon, we picked somebody who works with breast cancer. Please, 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 invite us to the table. That's what you've been hearing today from the chamber, from the manufacturers, that we all want to work together as a team. That's what our practitioners are saying to you as well. You filled an auditorium twice, hearing this kind of plea to you to let us be part of the team, not just making public comment before you vote, but actually crafting the plan for these kids that we've dedicated our lives to serving, our students in Indiana. Thank you for all your hard work that you do every day for our students, and thank you for this opportunity to address you.
David Rutherford, so A-team is back. David Rutherford, followed by Joan Riley.
Good afternoon. First of all, thank you to Dr. McCormick and the State Board for allowing us to come before you today and share some of the concerns that we have with you about the graduation pathways proposal. I share many of the concerns that my colleagues behind us have already talked about, and I'm not going to go back through all those over again for the sake of time. You've heard them, and I share many of those things. But I want to take a look at things from just a little bit different lens, and that's the lens of the state of Indiana and what the unintended consequences could be because of this. I know that in my district, the class of 2017 at Elwood Junior Senior High School, the graduation rate would have changed from 90.8% to 76.3%. And very honestly, compared to what I'm hearing from many of my colleagues in my area, that 76.3% would be very, very good. And that's concerning that we have a large segment of our population that would not be earning a high school diploma. So as a taxpayer and as a citizen of Indiana, I ask myself, then what are these people going to do? These are students that we are going to send out into the world without the necessary skills to be able to compete. And that's very, very concerning. The fewer high school diplomas, we think will almost do what you're not wanting to do. I mean, the intent of this proposal is to improve our students, to make them or have them be more prepared for post-secondary endeavors, whatever that might be. And we're going to have more students now entering the world that don't have those skills. That could mean greater Indiana citizens needing public assistance that our state is already paying a great deal of money to. I feel it could lead to, likely could lead to a higher crime rate for people trying to find ways just to survive in a difficult world. And these are just a couple of what I think the unintended consequences could be from this. I know what is intended. I think it's good. I'm actually supportive of the pathways type idea, but I think we've got a couple things we still need to work on. And so I would urge you, much like the rest of them have urged, or many of the rest of them have urged, that we need to put draft back on this proposal, and let's take a look at some things, invite all the parties to the table to work together so that we can eventually come up with a final draft that can be approved that will be good for all students in our great state. Thank you.
Joan Riley, followed by Kevin Owens.
I appreciate your endeavors to continue to refine and improve the educational system for the state of Indiana. My name is Joan Riley. I'm a parent. I'm a past teacher and now a special education director for the Northeast Indiana Special Education Cooperative. I'm requesting that you postpone your decision on the pathway, graduation pathway, and I hope that you consider the following things. Please include administrators, general education teachers, special education teachers from across the state, along with parents who would have students that could be impacted by this decision on your committee. Currently, the plan seems to be a vision that was used, and I hope that you will consider using the analogy of when you start to build a home. You develop a detailed plan. You go to the bank to see if you have finances. If not, you go back, you adjust, then you go and see if you have contractors, quality contractors to build your home. And I hope that you put all of these details in place when you move forward in this plan. Also, I have heard from many districts that the possible negative impact that this could have on our students receiving a diploma. And if this is the case, this would have a negative impact on our state's economy. Not only on our state, but individual students too, with their economic status, mental health, and quality of life. I hope that the committee will take consideration of what schools are already doing and make this plan flexible enough to include that. You've said that you want our students in Indiana to have a rigorous education, and we all want that in this room. In the effort to do this, the Core 40 has become our go-to diploma, and the general diploma seems to be of less value. I wonder, with the pathway of education and the different paths that are taken, will the Department of Ed put a less value on one pathway than another when evaluating the success of the schools? And I hope that you realize that for many of our students that are struggling, that a general diploma is a rigorous diploma for those students. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Can I just comment on something? You mentioned the Department of Ed. Can you say that comment again? Do you remember? It was toward the end.
I hope that the Department of Ed realizes that the general diploma is a rigorous diploma for some of our students. Okay, thank you.
Evan Coors, maybe, followed by Scott Croner. Kevin? Oh, sorry.
I wasn't on deck.
No, that's all right.
Again, as everybody else, I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you today. I'm very honored to be with a lot of the people here that work, very eloquent speakers, and I'm telling you right now, I am not. Franklin Central High School on the southeast side of Indianapolis. I'm proud to be principal there. I've been there for 18 years. which means either I love my job or I like stress, one or the other. I can't figure out which it is. But we are a 4-star school and have been for the past 5 years. We have been honored by Washington Post for 6 years as being one of the best high schools in the United States, as well as U.S. News and World Report, Newsweek. Our AP program's been recognized. We do a lot of great things, but not only for our upper level kids, we also do things for our kids that are struggling. We have a fantastic SIP program. We do a lot of great things, and I think what you've heard today is a lot of the high schools are doing great things. And I think what we can do is work together and capitalize on the fantastic things that the high schools are doing and come up with a great program. However, there's a few things I did want to talk to you a little bit about is that I think we have that imperative, that moral imperative to do the best we can for each and every student who walks through our doors. I heard a comment earlier today, and it kind of bugged me a little bit. One of our work people said that they need people that are creative problem solvers. Obviously, they've never been in a high school to see how a kid tries to get out of detention on Wednesday night. So our kids are very creative. But I'd like to invite any of you to come into our high school. You'd be surprised at the things that go on, how our kids are doing these, what they call soft skills, on a daily basis. And to me, I think it is very positive what they're doing. Several things that I just want to throw out there to you for your consideration. I think the implementation of the program as written is going to be difficult. And one of the things I'd like to put out there is a math figure, 1.39 times 10 to the 27th power. And that would be, with our 700 kids in our class, that equals the possibilities that a kid would have to go through to get a diploma based on what we have written right now. We could have to chart possibly 9,100 different possibilities based mathematically on what everybody has there. That's a whole lot of data that somebody's going to have to sift through, and it's going to be very difficult. What will happen is that we will have to take money out of the classroom to hire somebody to just keep the data for us. One of the things that is bothering me is that a lot of people you're going to force students and parents to jump through unnecessary hoops. They have a pathway. They are on the target for success, and they know where they're going. And I think there's an implication that our schools are failing. They're not failing. We're doing phenomenal things here. And I think that our Indiana standards are in place. We are reviewed very highly in the United States of what we're doing. And I think we need to capitalize on that rather than go back and say everybody's going to fit through one buttonhole. It's not going to work that way. A lot of this is based on the needs of the workforce. And I understand that. And according to use the SAT and the ACT, those are college ready, and I'm not so sure they're workforce ready requirements. So there's a little bit of a mismatch right there. One of the things that has been talked about a lot today is the workforce. And they talk about the soft skills and all that. But one of the things that I think we should look at is how the workforce reaches to the schools. Everything's been, how are the schools going to help the workforce develop these skills? And again, I'll go back, and I appreciate Dr. Yoder's responses here. They have an opportunity, too, to help train their employees. We get them there. They have the opportunity to train them, to help them, just like we do in the educational world. You hear a lot, not a lot of qualified skills for these workers. Nobody's yet said exactly what these skills are they're lacking. They say soft skills. Again, I ask you to come into the high school and look, and you will see kids that are collaborating. You will see kids that are using technology. You will see kids that are polite. They know what to do. They're task-oriented. You'll see all those skills there. So somewhere there's a disconnect, not from the high school to the workforce, but from the workforce to the high schools. And then the graduation rate, we said a lot about that also. At Franklin Central, we have a 97% graduation rate for our 2017 cohort. If we apply this right now, and granted it's flawed because we haven't put it in there, but you're also looking at some of our underprivileged kids that are going to struggle, but we would dip down to 66.6%. And one of the things that I think Indiana has going for it is that we've touted ourselves as a state that works. If we continue with this, we will end up being a state that can't graduate kids, and I think that's going to drive business away.
30 seconds. I'm sorry, Kevin. Scott Croner, followed by Carol Craig.
Dr. McCormick, members of the board, good afternoon. My name is Scott Croner. I'm the superintendent for Wauny Community Schools up in Elkhart County, Indiana. First and foremost, I want you to hear this, and I hope you've heard it time and time again. There are a lot of positives in this proposal that have come forward. This is a good start and a solid framework for us to work, but this is just our start. Unfortunately, as they are currently written, the graduation pathway requirements will do significant damage to the students, schools, and the communities that we all serve. We have run the data and applied the graduation pathway requirements to the class of 2017 for over 50 public and private high schools. This proposal drops our combined graduation rate to 62%. And I think Dr. Bertram's correct. You know, we've not skilled up yet to meet this new target. But let's face it, best case scenario, maybe we get half those students back. We're still at 75%. That's not good for the state of Indiana. I'd like to take a moment to respond to a few comments made during yesterday's testimony. I was obviously working on my computer, so I didn't get to catch it all. But one thing that jumped out at me was there was a comment made that we should just go ahead because people will just need to figure this one out. Members of the board, this is not leadership. We should never implement new requirements without the supports in place to make sure that we are doing it properly and correctly. We're talking about students here. Another comment was made during the conversation of the career pathways, and it was mentioned that we already deal with the concern of transient students moving to and from school corporations. Again, someone that works in the space knows that talking about students that transfer in and out of a PE class in 6th grade is not the equivalent of a career pathway. Career pathways require a very specific sequence of courses. If a student starts in welding and then transfers to a school corporation that doesn't offer welding but offers building trades, I can't go back and change that child's transcript. That child no longer has the ability to be a completer or a concentrator in that pathway. I understand that there's great political pressure put upon you as board members to approve this plan. I recognize that and I appreciate it. But I would ask you to question this. When has politics improved anything in our society? Folks, education is too important for politics. It requires leadership. Please be leaders and take your time before approving this recommendation. As our state superintendent and every educator in this room has come forward and stated, there's good things in this plan, but there are complications that must be ironed out first before we implement it. We've been here before. We've been through several rewrites and new uses of ISTEP that were rushed to implementation. We've been through several reiterations of our accountability model that didn't account for the changes that we had in ISTEP. We know what happens when well-intended proposals are rushed to implementation. It's expensive and it's ineffective and it fails. And we will be back here 2 years from now trying to correct the problems again if we don't get it right now. Please pause and engage with the educators that understand the complexity and the impact of this recommendation. Together, we can make this proposal work for students and for our state. Thank you.
Carol Craig, followed by Kim Dodson. And as a point of order, we have 10 public comments left, including Carol. 10. Carol Craig, followed by Kim Dodson. All right, I'll hold her. Kim, are you ready? Carol Craig, you're on deck. If not, Jason Urban.
Good afternoon, and thank you for, again, allowing us the opportunity to be before you to express our comments regarding today's proposal. I'm going to echo the comments of the overwhelming majority that you've heard here today. I think all of us look at the proposal that you are looking at passing today, and we agree with the intent. We all want students to be held to higher standards. We all have the same goals and expectations that we want our students to leave school with the skills that they need to be successful in whatever opportunity they choose after high school. Families, especially those who have concerns or who have students receiving special education, are very concerned about this proposal. And I don't know if I introduced myself. I'm Kim Dodson with the Arc of Indiana, so sorry if I didn't do that. But we do have a lot of families who are very concerned about this proposal because most of the time when students fall short of their expectations, it's not because the bar wasn't set high enough, but it's because they didn't have the resources and accommodations that they needed to be fully successful. I think the families, again, don't disagree with the content that is on the proposal, but we don't have any of those reassurances that we need to make sure that our students have the resources and accommodations to make sure that we have every opportunity to be successful in all of those boxes that we will need to check off.
I think that before you do vote on today's bill, or today's proposal, you really should reflect upon the comments you've heard. I think those that are in the audience that are the experts in the field are the ones that you really need to be thinking about. I am really thrilled that so many of them are bringing before you the concerns of special education students. That is not usually the norm. I'm usually very frustrated that more people are not talking about special education students. And so I really do give credit to all of the experts here that are bringing our students forward, because I think we are the ones that really have the most to lose in the proposal that you are being presented with today. So I really do hope that you listen to the concerns and thoughts today. Again, the intent is not bad. We welcome the intent. We welcome those higher expectations. We welcome you wanting to give us the skills that we need to be successful. But we also need to make sure that there are things in place, a plan in place to implement these to the fullest capacity and to making sure that all students have the opportunity to be successful no matter which school they happen to attend. Thank you.
Last call, Carol Craig. Jason Urban, followed by Mary Burton.
Good afternoon. Dr. McCormick and the board, thank you for your leadership and your service to the students throughout the state. I believe that everyone in this room has the best interests of our students at heart. I don't question that at all. My questions, like many others, are just about the logistics with the Pathways proposals. If I job shadow my parent, does that count? If I taught Sunday school, does that count? If I attend the school dance marathon, does that count? What about Tim's walkathon? Is that going to count? I see this as our next several years, officiating what counts and what doesn't count. And what I'm guessing we will find out is that our students are indeed engaged in employability activities, especially the way those activities are defined in Requirement 2. I really do question how Requirement 2 will actually impact our students' readiness, and if we are measuring it by college remediation and certification completion. It is rare that a student who meets the diploma requirements has not demonstrated some employability skills inside or outside the classroom. Franklin Central just did a great job talking about this. That's what we see in our classrooms. I worry that neither the DOE or local high schools can regulate this requirement with any fidelity. And when that happens, it just becomes a hoop to jump through. Ideally, the challenge to this board would be to focus on graduation requirement number 1. First, if the general diploma is eliminated for the state and federal accountability, then we have an opportunity to look at the requirements within Core 40. Why can't we take some of the spirit of the general diploma and develop some more relevant options for the Core 40? And the general diploma students who cannot meet the advanced math requirements are allowed to pick quantitative reasoning through more relevant coursework. Why can't this be the focus of the committee to bring more relevant options within the diploma requirements? For example, could career internship exploration, CTE pathways, certain science electives, or work-based learning be included in the quantitative math option for the Core 40? These alternatives would help us solidify the skills that most students would need for success at the next level, which is not necessarily Algebra 2. But rather an ability to manage their own independence in environments outside of high school. You heard it today from higher ed. They were recognizing a similar need. If we use the actual high school courses to certify readiness, it is something that we can verify with fidelity, and if included as an option within the Core 40, I think we can produce a more rigorous and relevant student experience than what's proposed. Additionally, eliminating Part 2 as a graduation requirement will eliminate what I think will be perceived as some hoop jumping for our honors diploma students. The data shows our honors diploma students are succeeding at the post-secondary level. They're prepared for their next. Why do they have to produce evidence of other requirements? Requirement number 3, likely most schools will meet this requirement through locally created pathways. I'm having a hard time understanding how that doesn't punish students who change schools. I think we could create a great pathway, but I'm really worried about how that exists school to school. Also from requirement 3, if this body is going to recommend college entrance exams for school accountability, shouldn't we consider the options under number 3 as alternative ways students could meet college and career readiness?
if they don't meet the cut scores for the entrance exams. It seems more logical if these options were rolled out alongside the accountability assessments in 21-22. To borrow my colleague from Yorktown's phrase, I just ask that you pump the brakes. Please consider waiting now and capturing the spirit of these pathways within the work on the statewide diploma and the new accountability assessments. Thank you for your leadership and for your consideration.
Mary Burton, followed by Sally. Oh, I apologize. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Thank you for your comments. I want to just go back to a point you made, just for clarification. You were talking about some of the work-based experiences existing within a course. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So project-based experience was more the norm of the instructional delivery, also internships. Also, we could develop, if those were allowed to count as the math requirement, students would demonstrate that.
You're saying that the work-based experience satisfying another requirement, not that being embedded in an existing course.
I'm saying both are happening. I'm saying the high school experience, they're learning those soft skills. They're learning that employability skills right now as they participate 9-12 in our high school.
And what kind of experience? Is just the course themselves?
Course themselves. Again, the things that you've outlined already. I mean, these things are already happening. Extracurricular activities, working jobs, all those things that you guys have outlined. That's happening. They're developing those skills already through their high school experience.
I think there are some things that could be embedded in courses that would satisfy these expectations.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
So in some examples, I know that folks have shared, I'm not trying to speak for you, but PCC, Preparing for College and Careers, you guys all know these adult roles and responsibilities, a lot of the courses that kids are already taking. We've talked about modernizing courses. So if we're saying we are woefully underperforming in some of the areas, where does this naturally fit? Health, all of our kids take health. Right. So some courses where it could naturally fit, and even not just solely, but enhance across the curriculum. So many people have shared it's already embedded, and if it's not strong enough, if it's not present enough, let's look at modernizing some courses and take a deep dive at students. We're already starting that work at the department to say, where can we make it fit naturally without forcing it into a trackability nightmare? So regardless of what happens today, we're already taking a look at that because we've heard loud and clear there's a need for that.
One of the things I've been particularly concerned with, it really aligned with the pathways, but even more broadly in terms of student expectations and the seamless transition into post-secondary, all the skills we're talking about, we don't have and I'm not for testing, all right, and testing, but there's really no formal way of assessing students around these skills. And it's not a lot of information that we provide back to them. Here are the very specific skills that you're going to need, and how are those assessed, not just within a high school pathway, but really in K-12. So I'd like to maybe explore that with you a little bit more at some point, and just think about, what would that look like? We could actually assess, and so as students graduate, they have a real clear understanding of the strengths. Thank you for your comments. Thanks.
Mary Burton, followed by Sally Sloan.
Hello, and thank you for hearing me out again. I'm Mary Burton, and I'm the Executive Director for the Northeast Indiana Special Education Cooperative, and also the past president of ICASE. We've already said an awful lot so far about special education students, but I kind of wanted to paint a picture for some of you. When I first saw the work and employability piece in this Pathways, I thought this is going to be awesome. We have students who cannot pass algebra, second try, third try, but man, they can take apart a car and put it back together in nothing flat. And I thought this is an opportunity for those kids to show what they know. But I want to also make sure that you understand that one of the unintended consequences of this are we have many students with disabilities who need supports with them for anything that they're accessing with regard to education, with regard to FAPE. For example, several years ago, we had a student who was totally deaf. He was in our building and trades program on diploma track. We had his interpreter was on the ladder with him so that he could get the instructions from his instructor. Another example, we have medically fragile students more and more because of medical science and the things that they're accomplishing. They have private nurses with them. And by private, I mean many of them are paid through Medicaid, but if they don't have the means to do that, it is a school's obligation to supply a full-time nurse for these students. They're on ventilators, those kinds of things. But they're getting a diploma. There's nothing wrong cognitively in terms of their ability to do that. So with these pathways and the expenses that are already incurred by school systems, have we really given a lot of thought to what that's going to mean when these kids are out after school? Work experiences, charitable experiences, those kinds of things. Also, I think one of the biggest issues for our students is this wait to fail model for the Core 40 diploma. And I realize there's nowhere that says it's a wait to fail model. But think about it. You have to take the Core 40 diploma. And only then, when it becomes evident that you are not going to pass, which I consider to be fail, then can you talk about going to a diploma that's a general diploma? Do we really want to put these kids through that? Wait to fail? I would like to offer the possibility that maybe the general diploma statutorily, and I realize this is not your bailiwick, but to propose that we go to the general diploma and make it an opt-in for Core 40 and honors. The other thing I wanted to address very quickly is there was a comment made by our business folks that we are getting more and more students who are not work ready. They don't have those work ethics. And I agree with them. But interestingly enough, as a person who employs young teachers right out of college, the young teachers coming right out of college, many of them have accomplished a great deal. They've accomplished a Core 40. They've had honors. They would meet this graduation pathways, no problem. Interestingly enough, some of these young people I have hired don't have the work ethic that we would like to see. I would offer that perhaps we're talking more about a societal problem than we are talking about an educational problem. I'm not sure education necessarily is our place to go when we're talking about trying to instill work ethics in our young people. Thank you for your time.
Sally Sloan, followed by Brian Disney.
Good afternoon, Superintendent, board members. I am Sally Sloan, Executive Director of AFT Indiana. It's the American Federation of Teachers. We recognize the work that you're doing on this Pathways model, and we compliment you for your efforts, your time, and appeal to you for further consideration of the issues that have come before you. Our members, teachers across the state, have many concerns about the process, the cost, the impact of the proposed requirements. Some may have been here today, except they're monitoring ISTEP. My points are similar to many that have already been made. I marvel at the times, and so many of them, that teachers, administrators, and school boards all come together on issues that will address our kids and doing what's best for kids. And you've heard that today. We are all together on this. We have a lot of concerns about the negative impact that this would have on those students who are at risk, special needs students, You've heard about the drop of graduation rates as much as 20%. I have to think about the confusion that this has caused in our community, in the education community, about which graduation rate do we look at? What is this going to do in our public communities? What are parents going to think? What about those of us or people in our communities that are looking to sell their homes or people that are looking to buy? They're going to look at graduation rates and go, oh, well, I don't want to live in that district. But these graduation rates do not reflect what's really happening in our schools. I hope that you will consider how you can address that and make it a reality that the graduation rates are really much better than what the federal laws may have us believe. We have an expectation for all students to pass college boards. Okay, there are some choices. I'm being very general here. But we have students that can't pass the SAT or the ACT. And right now, the students and families are paying for these. This is a cost consideration. Sometimes students take this test more than once, and they have to pay for it. How is this going to be paid for? Have you been in a classroom and watched special needs students taking ISTEP or ISTAR, some of these tests that they already must take? I've had teachers tell me how heartbroken they are to see the pain on these children's faces when they know they cannot pass. They're trying to do something that they cannot achieve. And I'm just concerned about what these requirements are going to do to those students as well. We have concerns about equity issues, not just in being able to pay for tests or who pays for that and the retake, but what about the schools that provide paths that other schools cannot? You know, welding has been mentioned. Not all schools have welding. What are we going to do about that? We really have to address that. As I looked at the section number 3 and thought about locally designed plans, you know, we really wonder what that contains. And I know there was to be some discussion about that today, but that concerns me. We have to have compliance. That's what this is about, I believe. And so we need to be sure there is compliance. For teachers, you know, we struggle with the requirement for dual credit because a dual credit teacher must have a master's degree. Teachers can ill afford to go back and get a master's degree, and particularly with the limitations of the statute about a compensation recognition for that. So I just need for you to think about those things. And I do appreciate your time and your consideration. We just ask you to postpone your decision today. If that means voting no for today, then that's what we are asking. A good friend of mine quips that we're building planes in mid-air here, and we think that's pretty risky, so we hope that you will take time to reconsider and move forward after that. Thank you.
Brian Disney, followed by Desiree Tartar. Oh, okay, so Desiree Tartar, you have moved from on deck to deck. Just trying to bring levity. Oh, and Todd Best, you're on deck, sorry.
Hi, my name is Desiree Tartar. I am a healthcare recruiter with Community Health Network. It's a major healthcare organization here in Indianapolis with about 200 sites of care. And this is the first time I've made a public comment on any topic, so I'm really excited today because I am passionate about this topic. I've been talking about this behind the scenes with friends and family for years, so I'm excited that there's a lot of dialogue around career exploration because there's a lot of pieces to this. The main piece that I'm thinking of is career exploration. I just want to do a little personal story. I am a first-generation college student. I graduated from IPS in McManuel High School when it was IPS. I think it's a charter school now. And graduated third in my class. Went on to IUPUI to get a psychology degree, although my path I thought was going to be different. I wanted to go to med school. Everybody's like, oh yeah, you can do it. You know, you've got the grades, you've got this, that, and the other. I started working at 14 because I needed to work, and just with our family income situation. So I've been working since 14. I handled a full-time work schedule and a full-time school schedule. I think I might have been missed, or I did not know where to seek out people for employment opportunities. You know, they say it's all who you know. I didn't know anyone. My dad's heating and air manager, my mom's warehouse, Target Distribution Center, so manufacturing. So I grew up with that. Didn't want to do that. Parents didn't want me to do it either. We hear a lot of talk about millennials and, oh, they don't want to do this and don't do that. I think I'm just outside of that generation. But our parents told us they didn't want us doing that type of work. We don't want you working these grueling hours. So a lot of these kids are out here looking for better. They're not accepting jobs that are working 60 and 70 hours a week. So I think we need to look at our expectations because those skills, they can be learned, they can be taught. There's going to be people that have them, there's going to be people that don't, and that's why there's different career paths. But I think being able to provide career opportunities. I just went to my son, he's in kindergarten, but I went to his career day. He's in kindergarten. My dad said they're starting that early. I said they should. But I just literally went for 15 minutes and said, you can be more, there are other jobs in healthcare than just a doctor and a nurse. You always hear doctor, nurse. So that's what you think you're going to go be. I am currently in the market for an EEG technician. It's a one-year training program, starting pay over $20 an hour. Position's been open for a year. I just took it over, so I'm learning more about it, and I'm doing a lot of work on that. But it was a year. Somebody would have told me that instead of it taking me 6 years to get through college because I worked full time, and I'm paying for all of that myself with my monthly, student loan debt. But I wanted to go to college. I wanted to make sure that I did that for myself. But I think it is the community's job, and not just the Department of Education, and not just employers, but we all have to own this problem. I think we need to have more mentors in society. I would love to be a mentor. I may not be that doctor or that nurse, but I have, through learning by fire and grassroots, learned pathways to get me into a professional position that I'm in now. I did want to say we have over 600 jobs posted right now at Community. Most all of them, I mean, we have definitely, you have all types of jobs in the healthcare system, but most of them require post-secondary education or training, but they're not all four-year degrees. I wish someone would have told me or come in and said, Desiree, you can be a nurse in 2 years. I didn't know that. I thought it had to be 4 years. Since I worked, I couldn't get the clinicals done during the day because they're all during the day. So I chose psychology. Thankfully, I got into the hospital, valet parking cars at 19 while I was going to school. And then I got some connections that way and was able to get into human resources. So we all have our pathways. I want to be careful about the requirements, thus restrictions that we put on people, but I think more opportunity for career exploration. So coaches, guidance counselors, they sound overwhelmed. So how can we help them with more coaching and just having kids discover, they can go and do their own research, but just discover that you don't just have to be a doctor or a nurse, or you don't just have to be a teacher. I mean, look what you guys are all doing. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you just teach. No, you can go into all kinds of different realms, and kids
30 seconds
whose parents didn't have that background, like mine had no, just get a job. We need you to get a job and turn 18 and do what you need to do. So that's my little piece. So I really appreciate the time to talk today and hear the dialogue around this. Thank you.
You mentioned a tech position you have vacant for over a year, over $20 an hour. What's the educational requirement for that position?
It is 1 year of training. One of the biggest schools I'm seeing is Institute of Health Sciences is one of them that I've reached out to. 1 year program, and then you can get certified through a certification company.
How far can that person progress in your organization with that certification? That level of education?
You can become a manager. I mean, people can take courses and become managers. Not everyone in our network that are managers or in leadership graduated with a master's. So if you're a radiology tech or a nurse, there are pathways for nurse example, patient care coordinator, you can become a manager. So there are stepping stones.
Talking about that person that you hire as a tech.
As an EEG technician.
Say it's high school diploma.
It is.
Right.
High school diploma. Yep, thank you.
So they get a high school diploma, you hire them at $20 an hour as a tech.
Yeah.
How far can they progress in your organization with a high school diploma?
Not much further than in those tech roles, correct?
That's the point, right? Is that, provide those jobs for people, but we don't provide long-term enduring careers for them, unless they want to stay in a tech position. Right? I'm just curious, just thinking about how we message this to students about those kind of opportunities. Right? The other question I have is, when you look at healthcare in general and work-based experiences and so forth, how open do you think healthcare is to getting high school students into those environments to give them those?
Didn't get time to touch on this, but a few years ago, I was a residency coordinator for a family medicine program at Community. So I hired physicians from medical school that decided they want to do family medicine into their residency. And one of the biggest struggles was getting preceptors. Preceptors meaning teachers. So these are people that are physicians in our network that need to teach these students. And they are held to productivity measures, just like most people are. And so that slows down their work. Anytime someone's teaching a student, it slows down their work. So there was a lot of dialogue around, do we compensate them for that? Because obviously it's taken away some time. That people are starting to just say, no, we can't do this because I now need to treat this many patients in this many time, and the teaching part of it, I can't do. But that is the main piece of how we get more people to do it. So it was a struggle. So that challenge that has been brought up, there are several things that I think need to be reviewed in this. But I think career exploration is very important. But I think the challenge is not everybody's going to want to do work experiences or do this. I think they should have an option. If they don't want to do it, we shouldn't make them do it. But for those that did want to do it, I need to know the opportunity. What are my opportunities? I don't know about careers. So I think you're going to have trouble finding a lot of employers that have enough people or enough time. Everything is time to provide those internship experiences or shadow experiences. Somebody brought up a course. Man, the course thing kind of sounds pretty interesting to me, where students can pick, I want to learn about, or I want to, explore careers. So it's a health exploration class, or if it doesn't have to be health, whatever. That idea, it can go somewhere, I think. But there is going to be a very big challenge of the time commitment for employers to be able to take their staff out of the field to teach. But again, that's where the community needs to own that. We need to make time to teach our kids. If we don't, where are they learning it from?
Irony is that we say that the lack of a skilled workforce is the most detrimental thing to business industry in our state. Yet we're saying that we don't have time to invest in the skilled workforce. I think that disconnect represents one of our greatest challenges.
It absolutely is. There's a huge disconnect between employers.
Unless the business community takes ownership of that. You can't say, and not you, or maybe you, but I think it's difficult to make a statement saying, this is our biggest challenge, yet we're not willing to invest in that challenge.
That's right.
Right?
We have
so
to.
We have to bring the business community together as a partner in education. Not as a critic, but as a partner. And that requires investment in time and money.
Absolutely does, and we have to. I mean, we have to.
You've just committed your organization to do that.
I'll have to take it up a couple of steps, but I am going to take this dialogue back because it's important, and it's important to our workforce, and I'm very passionate about both. So yeah, thank you.
Todd Best, followed by Jack Russell and Jeff Henderson.
Good afternoon, members of the board, Superintendent McCormick. Thank you to the board, not only for today, but for the volume of work that you've put in over the last few weeks in reading emails and listening to people and meeting, the panel that they convened, all the supporters that have been here today throughout the process, whatever that opinion or concept might be. Thank you to all the principals who have been working on this and considering this, and thank you to all of them who are back home administering some tests that they had to take care of today to make sure our kids are eligible for that diploma. Representing IASP, we were at one of the panel convenings as a collaborator, and I started that meeting by saying, we support this concept, which maybe caused a few looks around the room to be a little bit of a shock because I think the word was we were opposed to these things. Ultimately, you did get from me last night a letter from our organization that said we do not support the recommendation as it's written. Sometimes that, and I guess our concerns that I listed in there, I'll go through those. You have them written. But we talked about fine arts and the impact there, the cost, more assessments versus fewer, because we started to add them versus just say, here's one test, now find alternate pathways. The impact on CTE, staffing, courses, the demand, the special ed resources that would have to be allocated not only within the school day as we try to prepare for certain things, but also the impact under employability skills and how those kids would have to be served after school and in the summer. And then, of course, access to all kids for all the pathways, and that's been mentioned before around flexibility. I think sometimes people have misheard us as well, where we have advocated a bit for the use of the end-of-course assessments as a pathway, because schools do use those. And I understand from higher ed and from the manufacturers that they probably do not, because they're looking for what the students come out of school with was that diploma. Yet that early indicator that I think a couple of people have mentioned has its place in the end-of-course assessment. But please, don't miss the broader perspective of what we've tried to say. More options in those pathways. We have an A to F accountability system that's under rulemaking. It's going to have broad implications in how these pathways come out. And also then the discussion in the legislative session that we're sure is coming around diplomas. That is the system that is in tremendous flux, and that is the system that can be coordinated and worked with if the vote is to delay and allow those systems to talk together. That can be the elegant solution. Schools are doing a good job. And that's how I've tried to think through this over the last 3 months or so. Our diplomas do prepare kids. Are there kids that are not prepared? Absolutely. I can tell you that my son at Purdue University is probably one of those as well. We could all point to our kids that aren't quite prepared with our diplomas, yet we as even adults have some of those concerns too from our own knowledge base. Let's build from what we have with a strong diploma. Principals are focused on success after high school. Sometimes the concept was principals want to get them over a test and then focus on the next group of kids to get over a test. And that is absolutely false. We don't do that. I appreciate the employability skills discussion. Yet as I've tried to work through this too, I've tried to think how are those aligned within our coursework. And Dr. McCormick, you talked earlier about taking a look at how our courses are working and how that those employability skills and those Department of Workforce Development benchmark skills that are listed in there, how are those being emphasized? And if we're not doing a good job of emphasizing those, then by golly, let's get after it. I believe we have quality kids in Indiana. And I think we have those opportunities for them to take advantage of the higher tech or the opportunities in the manufacturing world or whatever it is, to employ their skills in those areas and have a strong career in those.
30 seconds.
But I think sometimes it is the communication piece that has been missed around how we message with those types of things. I've had a lot of time to drive around the state in my role, and the concept I thought was, well, if our 21st century scholars complete all those tasks, could that not be a pathway? But they might not earn a diploma now. Concentrators are standalones. That's a strong concept. The types of experiences that they get can be a foundation for a strong diploma and a strong career afterwards. So we would urge you to delay this vote, please, and allow us time to continue to collaborate with you. Thank you very much for your time today.
Jack Russell.
Dr. Bass?
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
That's okay. First of all, thank you for your work. Thank you for being here today. Appreciate your comments. There's been a lot of comments today about implementation, and I understand the concern about how will this all go forth. But I know you've talked with a lot of principals around our state. I'm assuming you've had a few conversations. And I was just wondering if you could draw any conclusions about the policy itself. Are there any gaps in the policy that you believe are themes or areas that, in speaking with principals, you believe we could address?
I think the idea of kids transferring, and that might sound like an implementation kind of a challenge, yet I think the kinds of pathways that we have in our current system don't necessarily recognize that issue. Yes, high school principals work with the credits when they come about, but if a student, again, starts to get down a pathway, makes a transfer, how do we accommodate that? To me, that's a policy issue that we need to address. One thing that I've thought about through that is how do we create a statewide foundational pathway? And you might say that that is there already through some of the SATs and the concentrator kinds of courses. Yeah, we've heard on the implementation side, that's where the policy and implementation aren't connected. We appreciate the idea that these locally pathways are going to come about, and I have no doubt of our principals' skills in putting those together. I've often said if you let us know the need, expectation, what you'd like from us, we can get there. We've seen that in numerous issues. But the uncertainty of what that local pathway looks like, so I think that became the angst when the memo came out. Because again, I've had a lot of discussions. Dr. Ernest has been gracious with his time with us as an association. And how we tried to get through those things, yet as I recall some of our dialogue and looked then at that kind of a memo, I was uncertain as to how those two connected. And maybe that's just clarification between he and I, but at the same time, I think that's what other principals were seeing as well. I would go back and also look through our employability skills. I was asked a question earlier at a different meeting. What I said, I think 80–85% of our kids are doing these already. We are now going to be documenting things that kids are already doing. And you could say, well, then that's okay, let's go do that. I would take a look at what are our kids, where are those gaps? If students are doing service learning in a school, what kids aren't? What kids aren't involved in that sports team for that year-long experience? What kids aren't involved in that project-based experience, whether that's coursework or otherwise? Let's target our policy after the kids that aren't getting there. How do we help address that versus addressing it as everybody's got to do it, and now it becomes record keeping, and I think that's been a clear issue as well. So those are two or three things I think about from our conversations with principals.
I think about, I'll go back to the locally created pathways again just for a moment. And I understand the concern about perhaps the memo and perhaps the lack of clarity around what that looks like. But you touched on fine arts as well, and I know it's come up 2 or 3 times. If a school were to create a fine arts pathway based on existing courses,
correct.
Under this, that student then would meet the requirements of both 2 and 3.
Correct.
Potentially.
Correct.
And could you see a number of other options in which they would satisfy those requirements, expectations?
Yes. And if I can respond a little bit or lead into something though too, I think the challenge became, or I guess, interpretation or assumption, which are always not positive things, but if we're focused in the career experience world, those types of pathways sometimes may not be able to get into those career experiences, yet still be strong, viable pathways within the school of what they've created. And I think that was a little concern that our principals were sharing around that concept.
You have a son that's a band director.
Well, we'll put a plug in. He'll be available in August of 2018 for a position. But sorry for that shameless dad plug.
Did everyone hear that? Right, there's a position open. But I hope you don't mind me asking, on a personal level, because, I mean, that pathway for your son led him into that career pathway, correct?
Correct.
That's where, so on the locally created pathways, what would you like to see to ensure that our schools have the greatest flexibility to meet language and the parameters around that?
Sure. And again, I try to think about how can we combine everything that's within that plan and hoped for, because that was some strong work after lots of time. So if we think about what are those employability skills, where are those being evidenced in the current coursework? I'm a whiteboard kind of person. I took time to pull those benchmark skills that DWD has developed. That was the document that's linked on page 3 of the plan. And I looked at those, and I also went through 3 or 4 or 5 courses in our current course offerings as a high school and said, what are those objectives, and how do those backwards map to our benchmark skills that they're wanting? Couldn't those classes serve as foundations for kids that were trying to get through that kind of a local pathway? Because if that's what our state is saying they want, and that's what the courses are saying they are doing, those two talk to each other in my sense. So that's one idea where I would head down with that. The next step I guess I would look to is to say what career experiences can we offer to those students that may be in the CTE world, may not be in the CTE world. Again, in the fine arts, I'm picturing all those pathways and concentrator kinds of things. I'm not sure those are in there necessarily. But what kind of a career experience could that be provided to my son in that vein? So that's kind of the way I've thought through this as to how that could be. And then there's some kind of a capstone experience that has a lot of flexibility, but isn't necessarily in that industry world. Certainly should be, certainly could be, but it may not be that full internship that we have there as well.
But it doesn't have to be under this plan, correct?
Correct.
I mean, so you could go to that pathway, have a capstone experience, and you met the requirements in 2 and 3.
Right.
Could actually end with a pathway that's created on a local level and meet requirements to it.
Correct. Right.
Doesn't that give us a lot of flexibility?
It does. And
I did that. The requirements don't become so narrow, correct?
Right, right. And I guess my advocacy on that side of things has been that if we as a state were to create that kind of a pathway, or to provide that type of a model, if you will, one that allows our transferability issue to maybe be dissolved a little bit, because if I was seeking a foundational pathway in school A and lots of other reasons moved to schools B, C, and D, somewhat that follows me and allows me to continue, not necessarily so true in some of our other pathways that are right there. And that's why I think if our schools also see that, they start to go, okay, I get this. We could now expand on this, because if I have these particular sets, I can now utilize that for this fine arts. And again, our kids are wonderfully creative at the high school world. The comment from, I think Jason Beers earlier talked about, sometimes it's more valuable to learn what you don't want to do than it is what you want to do. And so I think about the student that is in that, I'm in a concentrator world and I've got to finish it because that's my diploma pathway, yet I know really after that first year, I'm probably not going that direction, but I don't have the time to get to the others. What if that year-long concentrator coursework kind of experience were a part of this pathway? Then they could go do something else and still be eligible for the diploma. I think that provides us with a strong student and a strong graduate.
Us, given our current diploma system,
right?
If we visited our courses and modernized and integrated and allowed flexibility in our electives, could it get you there?
I believe so.
Thank you.
And that's from a former math teacher who knows that math is always that fun conversation that we have around the diplomas, because I think there's creative ways we can address that too.
Creative ways to do math?
Certainly.
Of course there are, right?
Of course there are.
It's all the new math.
Ooh, that's almost like pathways to me, sorry.
Yeah, I think this whole idea around the modernization of courses and so forth is exactly where we should go. The department's going to lead that effort, and I think it's going to be very helpful for us. And then what is that alignment around this? I think a lot of these issues can be embedded in courses and can be very intentional as part of that. I think there's also an intentionality around this, rather than, for some students, saying that's enough. But I think part of it's just it's the same thing with students going to college, right? You pick a major, and then you can pick a bunch of random electives that don't lead to something. Or you can pick electives that lead to a minor, right, or a double major. How do we align this in a way that becomes more intentional for students? Outcome for them. Thank you.
And I think some of those kinds of concepts were contained in our unfortunate maybe diploma discussion from a couple of years ago. The idea around giving kids a little more structure within their diploma does make sense to me. The challenge I would say I had at that time was we were providing much more structure and much more expectations of particular courses to every student. And I knew, having been that principal and having thankfully been a parent of 2 or 3 that got the honors diploma, the high level of expectations and challenges in getting through. That son who hopes to be a band director also earned that honors diploma, but couldn't go do any real exploration. Sorry, Dr. Bertram, he gave up Project Lead the Way because it wouldn't fit within all of those things.
Don't hire him.
I understand.
You don't have enough flexibility in those electives.
Right. So that's where I would hope that we could make the two things talk together. So thank you very much for your time.
And before you leave, so through our current diploma system, the trackability and the reportability is there.
Yes.
Quality control is somewhat there. So no offense, but we're not having walkathons. So with the trackability and the quality control of that and the transferability with that system is already in place.
Yes.
Jack
Offense designs bill.
We have 4 comments left. Can I please have all the following on deck? Jack Russell, you are up. Jeff Henderson on deck. Mary Ann Schlegel-Ruger on deck. And then Miss Irma on deck.
Good morning, good afternoon. We're getting to good evening. I appreciate this opportunity to speak with the board today. I appreciate your work on all this issue. I am Jack Russell, and I am the president of Center Grove Community School Corporation, Board of School Trustees in Greenwood, Johnson County. I am also a lifelong resident of Center Grove Community and have close to 40 years of experience in working with children, students at all levels. And I'm serious. I've done preschool, K through 12. I was the super sub. My education is Purdue University, but my real education is my doctorate from the School of Hard Knocks. You ought to read that dissertation. 3 things that I always look at are consistency, sustainability, long-term. Where is the consistency with these pathways across the board for the student, for the staff, for the state? How are we going to be sustaining these? It's great to put things in place, but if they go away after 6 months, what have we done? What does this look like long-term, 6 months, year, 2 years down the road? Our board at Center Grove shares the concerns of our superintendent, Dr. Rich Arkanoff, and the Indiana Association of Public School Superintendents regarding the graduation pathways recommendations. We agree that it is very important for schools to provide students with multiple pathways to get to that one diploma. This allows schools to better serve all students and not just those who will pursue a traditional college degree. In September, Dr. Arkanoff and I shared the stories of some of our Center Grove students who illustrate the critical need for multiple pathways to a diploma. In the interest of time, I'd like to remind you of just one of those students, my son. He is on the autism spectrum and is a very intelligent young man who is high functioning and has had an IEP since the 5th grade. He is now 22. Because he has Asperger's, he lacked the discipline for classes in the science areas. He received a general diploma. And I can tell you that the day the decision was made for him to pursue the general diploma track, his outlook hugely changed on school. He became more willing to work at his classes again. Because yes, one bad class experience that is ongoing majorly affects special needs students or general ed students the whole school day. My son and many students just like him will thrive and live enriching lives. They will serve society as members of the armed forces, firefighters, and in my son's case, the performing arts. These are honored professions. So I urge you today to vote against this current recommendation. If we don't provide students with multiple bona fide pathways to obtain their high school diploma, we are denying our educators the opportunity to best serve our students. The path to graduation should not look the same for every student because all students are very different. It is your duty and our duty to consider all students when making this decision. So after sitting here yesterday and today, I had some observations. I think it's 100% that everyone agrees on the need for the pathways. I just felt that, and everyone appreciates the work that has been completed on this issue, but we are at that point where the devil is in the details. What are the unintended consequences that can come up? Are we headed towards another unfunded mandate? It's already a challenge for the schools to just deal with the ADM reimbursement to keep things going. But I ask you, the board, the panel here, if you and your parents were starting into high school, would one of these pathways work for you? Could you maneuver the pathway as you know it now? I also want to hit on the societal aspect that the lady earlier did. Take, for instance, nice neighborhood, great houses. One house is a lawyer. One house is a plumber who has built his business up but did not go to college. Who do you think gets most of the accolades there? And that's a problem with your elementary kids. They already know what are the popular, more positive careers to go into over the others. So there is a societal point here that I don't know how we work with that, but it is always going to play into it. I have a friend who owns several McDonald's. He can't keep teenagers there, if at all get them there. Thus, he has a lot of visa workforce because they will work. But the teenagers think working a fast food situation is beneath them. And my son happens to work at one of these McDonald's, and for him it's great. It gives him direction and helps with what he wants to do outside of that in the performing arts. So I really ask you to think, is this truly, thank you, is this truly the best recommendation for the students of Indiana? Our students across Indiana have enough challenges in getting through high school. I ask you not to add to that. Thank you for your time.
Jeff Henderson, followed by Marianne Schlegel-Ruger.
Dr. McCormick, members of the board, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I want to express my thanks to each of you for the work that you do on behalf of the students of our state. I think I can speak for everyone in this room and those who have already departed when I say that we all share a common goal of making sure that our educational system supports each student's individual growth and development toward becoming a productive contributor to the economic well-being of our state and our nation. I would, however, like to share a few of my concerns regarding the proposal before you today for your consideration. Based on the language in the proposal, I'm predicting a significant impact on the staffing and resources required to support our special education and English language learners, as they may complete pathway options through after-school work-based learning experiences that we currently do not provide supports for. This will require additional staffing to provide the types of accommodations these students are afforded by law for anything that is required for graduation. I also question our community's capacity to support the necessary work-based placement opportunities required to meet the anticipated need. If you know much about the Center Grove Community School Corporation, and I forgot to introduce myself, my name is Jeff Henderson, and I'm the proud principal of Center Grove High School. You'll know that we have a large high school located within a very small geographic footprint in White River Township. It truly is a small community school with a large number of students. We will be competing for placements with Greenwood, Perry, Franklin, Mooresville, Southport, and Indian Creek, just to name a few. A move to the SAT or ACT as the accountability measure moves the administration of the accountability exam later in a student's high school career than has been the case with ECAs or the I-Step 10, which means that we have much less time to make mid-flight corrections should a student not meet that requirement. As a result, in order to guard against this possibility, schools might be forced to schedule students into a series of courses that will ensure they can meet a concentrator pathway. Given the vagueness that exists with the development and approval of locally created pathways, this will potentially have an impact on a student's ability to take elective courses in the fine and performing arts, where many people find gainful employment in a field that not only enriches our lives, but also increases the desire for people to want to live in our communities. This will cause a significant shift in staffing priorities in schools and increases the likelihood that these programs will no longer be sustainable in many schools. These increased requirements will also create additional monitoring, tracking, and reporting requirements, which will increase those staffing requirements as well. To the business representatives who were in the room and who have spoken in favor of approving the graduation pathways as presented, as of October 2017, we live in a state with a 3.9% unemployment rate. Do you really believe that creating additional graduation requirements will address the workforce shortage you are currently experiencing? Recent statistics from the U.S. Census Bureau indicate that Indiana only saw a 0.31% population growth last year. Many of our students leave the state after graduation from high school or college to pursue higher paying jobs in other states. When you consider the low unemployment rate coupled with the minimal population growth, it becomes quickly evident that this is not an education problem alone. Simply increasing graduation requirements will not address the shortage of available workers, but it will significantly increase the difficulty for many of our students to earn a diploma and the costs for public education. There is no doubt that we need students to leave high school in a position to pursue post-secondary education or gainful employment. As a board, I will encourage you to look at the fiscal implications of this, not only from the perspective of implementation, but also in the cost to our society for those individuals who are unable to meet these new graduation requirements and will subsequently not leave high school with a diploma. While we can all agree that the vast majority of new jobs being created require some post-secondary training, early projections by principals around the state show an increase in the number of students who will not be able to earn a high school diploma. And as you well know, students who do not earn a diploma are more likely to be unemployed and require social services and government assistance. I'd like to thank you for your time today, and I would ask that you vote no today on the proposal as it is presented in order to delay this until all of these factors can be considered. Thank you.
Marianne Schlegel-Ruger, followed by Ms. Irma.
I really wanted to be last, and I was really counting on it, and did I make it to within one? Possibly. The great thing about being last is I get to sit, and I get to write, since I didn't have it written before, and I get to listen a lot. And you've gotten to listen a lot today, too, which is obvious how seriously you're taking this, which is much appreciated. I am a parent of a college freshman, and a high school freshman, but I'm not going to talk about them today. I'm also an attorney, and I've worked for years at the intersection of business and education and law and children. And I equally honor all 4 of those. I am going to address different things than anyone else has, so keep listening. We've talked a lot about cost. We've heard a lot about cost and how maybe it's being considered or maybe it's not being considered at all. Maybe we know a lot or maybe we don't know anything. I think all of those are true. I think we may have some examples to look at, though, to explore a little bit about what kind of cost might be involved in this. And I will go ahead and jump ahead and say, as currently written, I do not support this. I think it has great ideas in it. I think as suggestions and options and things for the future, it's wonderful. It's not ready yet. And if it were adopted as proposed, it would be a disaster for our schools and for our students. And I think you've heard a lot of pieces of that. The places that we can look at to look at cost, or we can look at some of the schools that are already doing pieces of this in Indianapolis, or maybe almost all of this. The catch is they're not doing it for all students. And 4 of them, hopefully I can get through that I would think of. 1 is a public school district, 1 is a charter school, 2 are private voucher schools, 1 relatively high income and 1 very low income. IPS is the public school district. Dr. Farabee was the first speaker this morning, and I understand that he supports this, as he told you. What I hope that you know is that IPS is planning, of course, for next fall to implement much of this. And to do that, they, of course, are closing 4 schools, 4 high schools at the outer parts of the district and asking all students to come downtown to go to school at the 4 remaining schools. Every 8th grader this fall already has had to choose their pathway for high school. They will not go to a high school based upon neighborhood or family ties or broad educational objectives, but instead based upon that career pathway. In order for IPS to do this, they're going to have to slice and dice their students. They're going to have to segregate them, hopefully not racially, but in many other ways. Many people, including most psychologists and most people who work with children, don't think it's really best for children to divide them only according to what their interests are for their adult future. Also announced in the last few days is, in order to do this, IPS is asking voters to approve a $1 billion referendum this spring, in part to fund this. So for a public district that has 17% special education and 10% ELL, this means closing schools and needing a lot more money. I don't know if it's possible to do otherwise. Let's go on to the next one, which is Heron High School, which is also located in Indianapolis. Heron High School has 0.5% ELL and 10% special education. Heron does a lot with AP and really encourages all students to take it, so they fit within part of the pathways there. You may not know that they also do quite a few internships, especially with not-for-profits as well as with businesses. However, they purposely have located downtown, which means almost all the students can walk to those. They don't have transportation costs. Also, as reported by the Indianapolis Business Journal earlier this year, one of the ways that Heron High School has funded their operations was by signing a gift agreement to charge $1 million apiece for each of 2 board seats on a public board. That went to court because the person died, so they went to court with their written gift agreement that does say that's exactly what it's for. It's now settled last month, but we don't have the agreement because we don't have it yet, and we don't know what they settled for. Providence Cristo de Rayo is very low income. It's a private voucher school. It has no special education students. It does internships 1 full day every week with 95 different major corporations within Indianapolis. It does provide transportation. The businesses do pay the school to do that, so that's where the funding's coming from. Thank you very much. Please don't pass this.
Last but certainly not least, Ms. Irma.
Once again, thank you guys so.
Notice that we're twinning today.
Yes.
We do that a lot.
All great minds.
Let me know when I'm in it.
Okay, I will.
You know, I just want to say thank you guys so much. I know during this process I probably made a lot of friends and a lot of frenemies. But I'm in it for the long haul. I'm not new to this. I'm true to this. And I mean it. For the past 22 years, I've been in places I thought I would never go. God has blessed me to be able to advocate for parents, the haves and the have-nots. And I just want to take the time to say thank you so much, Alicia, for all you've done. If I was not impressed before, I am thoroughly impressed now with the way you've kept up with everything and how you try to keep us aware of everything. I also like to say thank you so much to the whole staff, the State Board of Education, Dr. McCormick, thank you so much. Dr. Yeager, for being the voice of those who could not make it, for being the voice of the practitioners. God, I'm getting so emotional. Who could not come here and speak for their children, for the ones who felt like they were not educated enough to speak for their children. I thank you. To Dr. Barton, for truly keeping us on our toes. Parents, administrators, and educators, for asking the questions that we wanted to ask and knowing how to bring it forward and get answers and from the people that we needed to get answers from to the whole state board. You know, I once told you guys, I don't see how anybody up here is married because
You offering?
I'm single.
This has become a reality show, all right? So, like, that's good.
To the script, huh? Okay. But the reason why I'm saying all that, because this was a very, very challenging situation, you know. And, you know, yesterday if he were here, you know, oh my God, I had my little boxing gloves out and everything because, you know, when we first started, because of the fact I worked so long with low-income and disadvantaged parents, and I represented Title I parents for the state of Indiana, I really wanted to be a part of this program. And that's why I have tried to do the best I could to make sure that I was at every meeting, so at least I could give you some feedback on how a parent/grandparent would view some of these things. Where do I start? I heard a young man get up and speak about 21st century scholars. I was a parent that worked on that program. First of all, your child had to sign up before the 8th grade. And then once they signed up, the parents' income had to qualify them. So that was you know, I heard what he said, but it did. Your income had to qualify your child if he could be a part of that. Not only that, by the 8th grade, by the time they were in the 12th grade, if they had not made a D, then they were still eligible. But can you imagine a lot of especially low-income children that were going through all kinds of things with their families and stuff, from moving from place to place, going through some of them even bullying in the class, in the schools and stuff. A lot of them fell short of getting that scholarship because maybe they made a D or even an M. They might have brought it up within those next 2 years, but that's what happened. I also would like to say about our fine arts department. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I was one of the Duchells from East Chicago sang with the Jackson 5, so hey, yeah, we need that. So I just want to bring that to your attention. And then the businesses, don't come to us empty-handed. If you're going to help our children, come to us with a plan that you have in place about training our children. We deserve that. And then again, special needs, and I'll be finished. In East Chicago, where we have children who are affected by the lead poison, who might have brain problems and stuff later on. What are we going to do about that? That program for special needs, for children with disabilities, and for English learners and stuff, we need those programs. I ask you right now to just hold your vote. You're a great organization. Don't let us down. We employ you to do this for us. Just wait. Let's just put a little bit more time. I believe Indiana is going to be the model state of education. After all, we got the vice president in office. God bless you.
And that concludes public comments.
There's something wrong with that when the DOE starts the class. You cannot find good help.
For the record, State Board staff sat here stoically. No.
Wow. Okay, so I had a request because of schedules, and so I am to ask if the board is comfortable skipping down to new business action with graduation pathways for the sake of the folks sitting here and for the sake of the schedules up here. Is that correct? So is the board comfortable with moving straight to the grad pathway vote on new business action B, and then we'll make our way back up?
Yes.
We're comfortable with that? Okay, so new business action B, graduation pathways. We have a panel recommendation and a presentation.
Yes, I'm going to be very crisp. Okay, so I wanted to just give you a quick overview of what has led us here, some things to consider, and then move straight to the recommendations. Here's the statutory language from HEA 1003 that was the impetus behind creating the graduation pathway recommendations. Just a couple of pieces to clarify based on statute. One has been around the general diploma. To reiterate, the recommendations before you today do not change the diploma structure. Diploma structure is set forth in legislation, in statute. So these recommendations are including general diploma, core 40, and then academic and technical honors. The only group of students that this does not apply to is our 1% significantly cognitively disabled students that earn a certificate of completion. They are not under this plan, but general diploma students are. In terms of waiver diplomas, again, that is also set forward in statute and determined by the legislature. So these pathway recommendations, that was just not under the purview of this statutory authority. That has to be done through a different mechanism through the legislature. So that is why you don't see waivers addressed in the recommendations themselves. It's just because of statutory limitations. And stop me if you have questions. Oh. Is it not working? Oh, there we go. Oh, sorry. Okay. So one of the main reasons this was thought of by the legislature back in March when the bill was being conferenced is because of this ECA remedial loop. Students currently have graduation requirements in place in addition to earning their diploma and satisfying course and credit requirements. To graduate from high school, students must pass, right now currently I-STEP 10, under HEA 1003, that would be changed to an end of course assessment, in Algebra 1 and English 10. What we have found is oftentimes there's a significant portion of students that do not pass these exams in the 9th or to the 10th grade, and because they are tied to graduation requirements, they have to enroll in a remedial lab and they have to retake the exam in order to get a waiver diploma. So this takes time out of the student's course schedule, this takes resources away from the schools, and this is one of the reasons why the legislature moved forward with implementing graduation pathways and moving away from a one-size-fits-all in terms of the ECA or the I-STEP 10. Another big reason is the changing economy. You've heard a lot of this today, so just a couple of quick facts. While jobs are back, they are not the same jobs that we lost during the Great Recession in 2007. Georgetown University has found that out of the 11.6 million jobs that have been created during the recovery period since the Great Recession, 11.5 million of those jobs have required some kind of post-secondary attainment. That means only about 80,000 jobs created in the last decade have been for those students with only a high school diploma. And I have an Indiana-specific fact if that would be of any help. So this is just a graph showing where the jobs have been going. So between 1989 and 2016, the number of jobs for workers with a high school diploma or less has actually declined by 13%, which is a loss of 7.3 million jobs. The number of jobs for workers with at least some college, so that's any kind of post-secondary attainment. That's not a bachelor's degree, that's a certification, a credential, an AA degree, something beyond high school. Those positions have expanded. The number of jobs held by workers with a bachelor's degree or higher has more than doubled since 1989, from 26 million to 54.2 million. And the number of jobs for an associate's degree or some college, so some kind of post-secondary credential, has increased by 47%, from 30 million to 43.5 million. This is from another Georgetown University report. So this is an Indiana-specific chart, and we are seeing significant growth in Indiana in our middle skills jobs. So those are jobs that are geared not for someone with a high school diploma or a bachelor's degree, but post-secondary attainment in between. Again, credential, certification, or an associate's degree. And in Indiana, those skilled services jobs have grown more than the national average. So all of this data, to just boil it down, is that a high school diploma is no longer the finish line. We can't see that as the end for students. Since most students now will need additional opportunities for education after high school, whether that's technical training, a certification, or a post-secondary degree. And that is in order for students to find long-term, sustained economic viability. So Carol mentioned this significantly, so I'm going to just kind of breeze through it a little. So according to DWD, over the next 10 years, Indiana will have 1 million vacant jobs. 700,000 of those jobs will simply just need to be replaced, and 300,000 will need to be filled. So looking at our post-secondary attainment, Indiana is actually below the national average right now. We're at 41% across the state in post-secondary attainment. The national average is 45.9%. And in looking at attainment amongst various minority and ethnic groups, that's where we really see a lag. So for Hispanics, there's only an attainment of 17%. For Native Americans, it's 24%, and African Americans, it's 25%. So we're seeing a huge disproportionality amongst our subgroups. So this map shows the spread of post-secondary attainment in our state. The breakdown is, right now, we only have one county, and I believe that is Hamilton County, that is meeting that 60% threshold for post-secondary attainment. The yellow counties are those meeting the national average at about 45%, and the majority of the state is below the national average. So this is a lot of what Carol talked about as well, based on the chamber survey, and this was what was presented to the panel. We're seeing a huge need from employers around talent, that they're unable to fill positions due to underqualified applicants. For those employers that are looking to increase their workforce, about 53% say the supply of qualified applicants does not meet the demand, and 85% say filling the workforce talent needs is their primary challenge. So examining post-secondary attainment now in our state, so drilling a little deeper, and this is all through data collected and reported by CHE. We currently have 65% of our students, which is roughly around 47,000 of our high school graduates, go on to some kind of post-secondary education or training. So Indiana has a really great graduation rate right now, specifically for low-income and non-low-income students. But we're seeing a lag for graduation, but that graduation rate is not seeming to translate into higher rates of post-secondary enrollment. When we look at remediation, which is a significant factor in completion, we're seeing that the state has about a 14% remediation rate. But disproportionately, that remediation rate affects our low-income and minority students at a greater rate. So breaking down this remediation rate, and this shows based on just diploma, but breaking it down based on student subgroups, 21% of low-income students need remediation, 29% of our African American students need remediation in college, and 17% of our Hispanic students, which is above that 14% average for our state. Now, remediation has an almost certain causal negative relationship with college success and college completion. The longer it takes a student to graduate, the less likely they will do so, and we know without question that remediation prolongs the higher ed experience. And then from a financial perspective, students only have a certain amount of federal and state financial aid available to them, and they burn through that for their remedial courses. So their Pell Grants, that is being burned through in order to take remedial courses in college.
Alicia, may I ask a question while we're on this slide?
Yes.
Because it has to,
Yes.
it pertains to this information. 14% remediation need, that's correct, that's what
Yes,
you
sir.
reported. Is that a drop in what it was?
It is. It has dropped since that's been cut in half, about 28%.
That's pretty good, isn't it? We must be doing something right.
We are improving, but if you, I have access to a map. If you look at across our counties, there are counties in Indiana with over 30% remediation rate.
Okay.
And I can break that down even by district. So while on the average, I think we're doing great, if we're looking at it for our subgroups and then in certain pockets of the state, I wouldn't make that argument.
Yeah, well, 28% to 14% is pretty darn good, but it's not good enough. And we need to keep working hard towards that, so.
Especially since we know remediation has such a negative impact on college success and college completion. And especially when we see which students are needing remediation.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
How does that first bullet run nationally?
Ooh. In terms of how many of our students compare to the rest of the country?
How do we compare as a state?
In terms of post-secondary attainment, I believe we're 42nd out of the nation.
So that 65%, we're 42nd out of 50.
But I would have to dig into that a little bit deeper to get full figures for you, and I'm happy to do so. Yeah, of course.
Is that a K-12 problem or a higher education problem? It's an Indiana problem, I get that, but I'm just curious where are the challenges?
If you're asking for my personal opinion, I think it's both. I think there is definitely, seeing a remediation rates, while they have been cut in half, that is a K-12 problem. That if you have a student entering college without the ability to take a 100 level class, I think that's a K-12 problem.
Is that where they're dropping out?
Some of them are, yes. So I have the figures for
The first 100 class we don't do well, we drop out of college.
some of them, yes.
What are the statistics around that?
The statistics around that specifically are, of those students needing remediation, only 8% in our two-year colleges go on to complete, 21%, and that's about 1,300 students. 21%, that's about 1,000 students, go on to complete. Of those students, of those 4,600 students needing remediation.
Just curious, so in a traditional four-year program of study, where is the exit point of those students?
It honestly depends. So if I'm a student, and let's say I'm a low-income student, so I'm getting a Pell Grant and I'm taking federal loans, I have to use that money to take my remediation courses. Now, if I get credit for those courses, I'm on a different track because I'm at least earning credits towards my degree. But if I'm not even getting credits for those courses, I'm farther behind in even completing on time.
Is the primary reason that students drop out of college because of low academic performance?
I think the primary reason is low academic performance coupled with financial burdens. When you burn through your Pell Grant money and you burn through your federal loans, you have to take out private loans or it's on you to pay for your college.
There's an assumption you're burning through that,
Yes.
as opposed, because the Pell Grant doesn't pay for everything.
It pays for remediation, it pays for credits you apply it to.
Say, if you look at a cost of $20,000 a year for college, the Pell Grant doesn't pay for all of that.
That is correct. So
Right,
the
you're
rest of it's
looking
made
for
up
other
of loans.
resources. You're either going in debt,
Yes,
you're getting a Pell Grant, or you're paying out of pocket.
or you're taking on federal loans.
How many of our students in Indiana drop out because they cannot afford to pay?
I would have
Which
to
is a
follow-
very different issue than dropping out because of academic performance.
I would have to follow up with CHE to get
I think
a
that's
better.
a critical
yeah.
question, right?
Well,
In
the
terms
only-
of why are our students dropping out? I mean, that was the whole idea around WGU Indiana, right?
Yeah.
Was to look at students who dropped out of the system, make it more affordable, low cost, online, more accessible, more affordable, right? And it was really this premise that it was the other issues that made it more difficult for students to complete college than their prior academic performance? Like to know the answer.
Yeah, I'm happy to follow up with CHE to see if they can drill down into the data. Yes, sir.
Sorry if I missed this. What year are these statistics from?
2015. That's the
15?
latest data that they have, but this is their 2017 report.
So the freshman year math remediation, has that at all been impacted by Ivy Tech's change in their math pathways?
So we are seeing some improvements in that. There's a lot of data that suggests that coupling remediation with credit-bearing courses, or even bringing remediation into the high school space. So Tennessee is doing that currently through their sales program, that they bring remediation into the 12th grade year so that they're making 12th grade more of a transitional year to post-secondary. There's research around that, national research, that shows that that bears a lot of good outcomes for students. So that is producing outcomes, but the data doesn't reflect it at this time.
So Ivy Tech changing their math pathways for freshman students hasn't impacted that number?
Not that I know of. That's fine.
I was sitting here thinking that, and was been a long day.
Yeah.
And thinking about how to weigh in. But there is a correlation. Is Jason Beers still here?
Nah, he left.
Okay, so he can speak to this, and in fact, he did on November 7th during the work session, as you recall, when we were getting the final recommendations. And the drop from 28 to 14% directly correlates to the implementation of co-requisite remedial models.
I just learned recent data that actually has been impacted. So yes, the answer is yes. You're welcome. So looking yeah, I'm sorry.
I think for all of us, could you repeat that? Where everyone, I think, understands completely what you just said around that drop.
So according to Katie Moat,
According to the Commission for Higher
Education, and Jason Beers in particular, so let's attribute all of this to him, is that by having remediation coupled with credit-bearing courses, or moving remediation into the high school space, has significant, as it goes to Dr. Yeager's point, that our remediation rates have significantly dropped from a 28% state average to now 14% state average. And that remediation need specifically is usually in math. We see a higher need in math than we do in ELA. And we don't track science or social studies courses, we only track ELA and math for remediation.
And what determined the need for remediation?
So typically that is determined either by an AccuPlacer course. It can be determined by students' board scores on SAT, ACT. It can be determined by scores in their courses. It can be specific based on institution. I believe for Ivy Tech and Vincennes, it's based on AccuPlacer though.
All on one exam?
Yes.
Performance on one exam would determine whether a student needs remediation.
Around the AccuPlacer. Okay. Well, Katie agrees. Yes.
So I guess it bothers me that we have to ask the question that it's decreasing, and rather than it being reported. And we need to celebrate the fact that our people are working hard. And we're not proud of that as educators. We're not proud of that number, but we are proud of the number that we cut in half. So it kind of bothers me that it's not included in your report. Just a comment.
Okay. So moving on, so looking now at average GPAs, again, this all comes from the Commission for Higher Education. The average GPA for our Hoosier freshmen right now in their first year of college is a 2.6. You can see it broken out by diploma type, but breaking this down by low income and subgroups, low-income students have an average GPA of a 2.3. Our African-American students have an average GPA of a 2.1, and our Hispanic students have an average GPA of a 2.4.
All of our post-secondary?
Yes. Everyone, I believe so. I'm not 100% on the private, but definitely our 4-year publics and our 2-year. No. And they go to Harvard? No. No, these are based on Indiana statistics.
Is this a 4-point scale?
Yes.
And so what was that lowest, 2.1 for?
2.1 for our African American students.
So 2.1 equals what at a university?
A C.
A C, okay.
What percentage of Indiana students go out of state to college?
I'm sorry, I don't know that number off the top of my head.
Would you ask that question again, Vince, please?
I'm just curious, what percentage of Indiana students leave the state to go to college?
So the follow-up to that is we don't know what their GPAs are.
That's correct.
I can tell you the majority, I mean, I don't know hard statistics, and again, I can follow up with you on that. The majority of our students that are in that 65% are going to our four-year institutions or our two-year public institutions. The majority are going to four-year public and two-year public, with the high majority going to Ivy Tech.
So what's your point? I mean, we're arguing about, certain things, and we're asking for more information, and some of the more information questions may not pertain to your point. So what is your point? What are you trying to lead us to believe, giving some of these statistics?
That not all students are prepared for the rigors of higher ed when they arrive.
Okay, so that's your theme. You started with remedial courses, now we're on to GPA.
Correct.
And so that's the gist of this. So the argument is that our students are not prepared for higher ed.
Not all of them.
Okay.
And we can see
Relevancy of the question was, it doesn't reflect all Indiana students.
Correct.
That's the point. Correct. I mean, that was really the question, is that we're not looking at 100% of our high school graduates and what they're really doing. We're only seeing a subset of those students who are going on to Ivy Tech or to our state institutions, correct? Not even, potentially even to our private institutions.
Yeah.
So the students are going to Notre Dame, Rose-Hulman, Wabash, DePaul. Those students aren't included in these statistics at all. So it's really a subset. My question was, what is the percentage? What is that subset? Is this 60% of our graduates that are performing at this level? Or is it 30% or 90%? I don't know. That's why.
I mean, I know it's the majority of our students that enroll in higher ed stay in state. I just don't have the hard numbers. And again, I can follow up with you on those, but I just don't have that off the top of my head. So the last piece around post-secondary completion, and I think this is where we see a lot of gaps arise, is around this completion of post-secondary. So one of our public comments mentioned this earlier, that they were seeing a lot of people enroll, but a fewer return on that investment in terms of completion. That's where, when students don't complete, we have national trend data that shows if you enroll in college and you stop out and you take on that debt, you are more likely to default than someone who does complete and earn a degree. So moving now to the panel recommendations, this specific graphic I want to note comes from a CCSSO, that's the Council for Chief State School Officers report around Destination Known and around their recommended measures for measuring post-secondary college and career readiness. I think as has been alluded to by Dr. McCormick and others, the recommendations can be synthesized to a diplomas plus approach, that students need to have their high school diploma, an applied learning experience, and some sort of currency showing post-secondary readiness. And one thing I wanted to mention is around the national collaborators. I've sent you letters from 9 different organizations that are nationally recognized, either as special ed experts or high school readiness experts, just to distill some of the messages from them. They have noted that these pathways are meaningful, challenging, and engaging for students. They've noted the currency that is involved and the value for post-secondary opportunities. They have noted that these recommendations strengthen the high school diploma's value in the marketplace. Our two letters from national special education organizations, the Advocacy Institute and the National Center for Learning Disabilities, noted that these recommendations establish high expectations and standards for all students, but they caution that those high standards need to be coupled with appropriate instruction, accommodations, and assistance, specifically for our at-risk students. There is space, Knowledge Works specifically mentioned the space for local adaptation, flexibility, and innovation. And then finally, as you saw from ECS, These recommendations follow national trends set by other states, and I just want to give you a quick list of those states that are already doing this or have this included in their CCR indicator, so that you can see that this is based on research that I specifically have conducted on other states, and that includes Arizona, California, Colorado, Delaware, Georgia, Massachusetts, Mississippi, New Mexico, New York, North Dakota, Oregon, Rhode Island, South Carolina, Texas, Washington, and then our 3 neighboring states, Ohio, Kentucky, Illinois, all have pathway recommendations similar to this. And then my final slide, unless there were any questions, and I'm just trying to keep it crisp. So to reiterate just some clarifying points, the high school diploma includes the general diploma, Core 40, and both honors diplomas. For rows 2 and 3, there's just been some confusion that I've fielded that students really need to complete one of those. I recognize I had a formatting error with my ORs that it looks like you had to do all or what or just the locally created. It's just one of each of those sub-bullets. And then one last clarifying point is around the SAT and ACT scores. These are set. This was not set by the panel. This was not set by the Commission for Higher Ed or me. This was set by College Board and ACT, and I believe we have College Board here to further explain this if I don't do a sufficient job. But these scores nationally correlate to national trends, indicating if a student has earned a score that gives them a 75% likelihood that he or she will earn a C or higher in the corresponding intro course. So this is not an average. This is not a mean. This is a score set based on national trends by those organizations, and they do fluctuate based on those national trends. And I'm happy to answer any further clarifying questions or step away.
Sorry, Alicia, you lost me in your last part.
Yes.
Would you please go over that again?
Yes. So one of the things we've heard either through public comment or I've heard just in my conversations with people on this is that the SAT and ACT scores that are set in the recommendations, for SAT it's a 480 in reading, and in math it's a 530. We keep hearing that that's an average, that's based on a bell curve that will have 50% of students score below and 50% of students score above. And again, Tricia Renner's here, who's an expert in this, and I'm not, but she can explain this more clearly. But those scores are actually set by College Board based on a 75% chance that a student who gets one of those scores gets a C or higher in the corresponding intro course. Not an average score, not a mean, but a nationally trend score.
Last part helped, thanks.
Okay, yeah, you're welcome.
So I want to go through it. So in number 3.
Yes.
What we're saying is that if you're an academic honors diploma, you get that, you've met that requirement.
Yes.
And if you're not, you can sit, if you take one of the exams, you score a certain score, you've met that requirement.
Yes.
Right? So the other ones are obviously self-explanatory. We had a lot of discussion yesterday about the locally created pathways.
Yeah. In the memo that you really enjoyed, I take.
I wasn't going to say that. No, but I am interested, though, in if this moves forward, what is our commitment in the creation of the locally created pathways in terms of the expectations and how we engage with other practitioners and to ensure that schools maintain the highest level of flexibility to meet the needs of students? How are we going to go about that, and what is that process going to look like?
So I think in my conversation with Dr. Ernest, and please jump in to clarify if I missed something, there would almost be like a 2-track process from our conversations. The first track would be to give schools or consortium of schools or districts a planning grant so that over the 18-19 year, they work with industry or business or higher ed or even a third-party convener to develop what that pathway looks like. And that's what the planning grant was for. The second track is for schools that are already doing something innovative, and we have a lot of them out there. You've heard from some of them today, but I've talked to some that are doing some really interesting things that may not fit into one of these bullets, but they're already doing these things. So if they want to go ahead and get approval for that and have that qualify as a locally created pathway, there's just an application process similar to how we do kind of freeway accreditation, where a school applies for immediate accreditation, staff vets it, gives you a recommendation, but that school still comes here and presents their case that you vote upon and approve. It'd be similar to that. There would be some kind of application process. Staff would vet it, give you a recommendation if this should be approved as a locally created pathway or not, but it's still up to your discretion as the board as to whether or not you approve it. And once that pathway is approved, it's scaled to the state. So any district can adopt that pathway.
What is it?
And Vince, if I could jump in real quick here on that, I really would like for you to just put that memo out of your mind. Because again, I took responsibility for that yesterday, and call that my fault, because sometimes me trying to help gets me, actually a lot of the time me trying to help gets me in trouble. That came from me really having talked to schools and want to try to create a first run at that, and everybody took it as it was the final draft, and it wasn't at all. It was a first. In fact, we had tried to meet with some people last week to no avail. Didn't want to meet with us, I guess, on that. So please know that we want to do what has been said today, is sit down with practitioners and look at what would that look like. But that was one of those first drafts at, hey, what's this look like to start with? So that's what that was.
I just want to make sure that we have a flexibility to be able to meet the needs of students. And that's a local issue. So what is innovative? I mean, it's a very subjective issue, right? And obviously we have to make decisions, but as I look through the pathways, there are a number of things included in the pathways that I would not consider innovative. I would consider very traditional, and in some cases even antiquated. But we can meet that, or we have to create some innovative experience, and my question then is, what is the benchmark? Is it going to be based on the other pathways you could pursue, or is it something completely new and innovative? And I think what we're saying is that we can take existing courses, existing programs, and get those approved for pathways.
I think the key piece that was discussed in the panel, and again, I looked to Dr. Ernest, is that whatever that locally created pathway is, it has currency for the student after high school. That was something, I mean, as a viewer of the panel, that was something I heard as a theme over and over, and you know, Mr. Watts, if you want to step in as well as someone there, that was something that we heard over and over, that whatever we create has to translate to whatever that student wants to do post-secondary. So if it's something, so the only pushback I would give to you is that if it's a set of courses that really translate to nothing else after high school, I don't think that would meet muster if I were reviewing it, but I also don't think it would meet muster for you all as well.
So let me use the example that's come up several times in fine arts. So a student is interested in a pathway in the arts, and the school says, okay, here are the art classes we offer. We're going to take electives in our program, and we're going to sequence them in a way that could lead to that outcome.
But what is that outcome? Is that outcome that student enrolling in RISD? Is that outcome that student going to Juilliard? I mean, is that outcome that a student becomes a ballerina? So I think that's where, from my perspective and just listening to conversations, that would be the key piece that we would need to know.
No, it's Todd Bess's son. They want to be a band director.
Okay.
Right? So that's my point, is that not a ballerina. But well, it could be. I mean, and that's true with anything in here. Right? Just the fact that you do one of these doesn't mean that that's what you're going to do.
True.
So
right?
Truly may get to college and decide
to become an engineer.
That's exactly right. And in fact, may take those classes and, as someone else said, decide, I don't like that.
I have 4.5 million students in Project Lead the Way. 4.5 million.
70% pursue a STEM pathway. 30% don't. They're taking a sequence of courses, capstone, and so forth, and they decide to go another direction. We support that. That's good. They choose another pathway. My point, though, is that we have no guarantee that that's going to lead to something, that they're actually going to pursue that. It's the intent, right? The experience that they're getting by moving through a particular pathway. And it's going to be very difficult for us, I believe, to say, no, that's not a legitimate pathway. Right? Because that really becomes a local and individualized experience. That's going to be the challenge I think we have. They are.
And some flexibility within those.
I absolutely believe we can. And I've been saying that from the very beginning around the locally created pathway, is that take our electives and sequence them differently. I just believe the randomness of electives doesn't lead to some of those outcomes. If we become more intentional and we get the students to think more intentionally about the sequence of those courses, it could lead to something really exciting for those students. Right? If I'm interested in any particular area and I just start taking random courses because it fits my schedule, versus saying, here are the 4 or 5 courses offered at my school that I can sequence in a way that gives me a broader and deeper experience, then it increases the likelihood that I could make a post-secondary decision, but at least gets me to that place where I can make that decision. And that's been my point. Yeah. And I don't want schools to lose that flexibility. And it could be everything we're already offering. And in many cases, it could satisfy both requirements in 2 and 3.
I think that is true.
Anything with a capstone experience.
Yep.
Anything with any kind of work-based experience. And I think there are certainly a lot of details that we don't have. I want to just ask 2 or 3 more questions real quick, because I think there are some other things that came up yesterday that I want to just revisit and to see what our path forward would be.
Yep.
One is the alignment of our accountability system with this, because it's going to change, correct?
So we, as a state, we have our accountability rule open. That will be visited by you all as a proposed rule in the future, and that will be open then to public comment for a final rule. So aligning these is imminent, but in order to do so, we have to know what it is we're aligning. Does that make sense?
But that would happen in the General Assembly starting in January.
That would happen here at the state board.
I mean, anything that would require some legal or
anything that requires a statutory change, that would have to, I mean, they're finalizing bills now. So that would have to happen imminently, yes.
What about funding effects?
So one thing that the panel decided to do is to push back implementation by a year. So if you look at the statutory language, it says that the recommendations that this board adopts will become law of the land by July 1st, 2018. So potentially, the document you had in front of you could have been used for next year's freshmen. The panel decided to push back implementation by a year so that it's now starting in the year 2019-20 to allow for a budget year. So 2019 is a budget year that funding, while it may not be completely figured out, but it can at least be addressed. And this is something that is done very typically with policy and implementation. If you look at, and I'm bringing in like my federal background, if you look at the way the federal government works, a bill passes with an authorization amount, and then it goes to the Appropriations Committee, and the Appropriations Committee gives it its own amount. So there's not often alignment between even at our federal level. So having the policy in place ahead of the funding is not atypical. I'm not saying it's the best approach. I'm just not saying, but it's also not atypical.
How much will be saved by the elimination of intercourse assessments?
I believe it's over $4 million, I believe. And then the remediation needs and the retesting needs that our individual schools and districts put toward that, I can't quantify.
What about waivers and some of the issues we've heard about mobility and so forth?
So waivers, according to last session, the department had authority to recommend a new waiver process. I don't want to throw the department under the bus. They are waiting for this to be decided in order to, that this is to be decided in order to figure out what the waiver recommendation could look like, but that's determined by the legislature. I will say we have two current waiver processes in place. One is a work-ready waiver, which includes work-based learning, it includes a certification, and it includes one other piece. Those are already included in these pathways. So that work-ready waiver has become moot if these pathways pass. The second waiver option is that a student exhausts all the retest and remediation possibilities and gets a 95% attendance rate, a C average GPA, and has teachers sign off that that student is a good student. That doesn't necessarily align with this, so that waiver option would definitely have to be revisited, but it'd have to be revisited by the legislature. Now, as a body, the board can recommend what that waiver can look like, but you cannot authorize it.
Mobility is going to be a significant issue for us. We heard that, but it will be.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when students move across pathways, and even within the same school districts in some cases. You can move, you know, in IPS or in South Bend. I mean, school, particularly when you get into some of the magnet school, anyone that transfers at all could be in jeopardy. So I think having that waiver process in place is going to be really important as well.
And I will say for the other states that I listed that have a waiver process, it usually looks like a portfolio. So that is an option. Again, that's not something the panel could decide. That's not something this board can decide. That has to be something that the General Assembly decides. That I don't know. I'd have to follow up with some of the national experts.
Can I follow up on what Vince just raised, the issue of accountability? I think in an indirect way, he just answered the question that's been on everyone's mind as to why this needs to happen today. It would be much easier, and I think more efficient and effective for us to build an accountability model around the graduation, an adopted graduation pathway system, than to start down the road next month of accountability and then try to fit graduation pathways into some new accountability system. That is, I think, fundamentally a flawed approach, and I think it also highlights the importance of passing this today, because next month, January, we open up accountability. The proposed accountability rule will be before us in January, and that proposed rule, that proposed system needs to take into effect the graduation pathways model that we're going to use.
That's correct.
I'd like to follow up on Dr. McCormick's question. And Dr. Burkham, thank you so much for asking the questions that you asked, because I think they're all important and they're issues that we need to be thinking about and figuring out. How many states did you read off that we are trying to, we're taking models from?
It was less than half, I think it's about 20.
20? Do we know in the report how many had similar grad requirements, and how long, do we know the extent of time that those states put into figuring out what their grad pathways would be, and the makeup of the committee panel group that determined grad pathways in each of those states? Do we know that?
Not in each of those states, no.
Don't you think that's important? Because that's what we're wrestling with here. Wrestling with a lot of that.
I would say that's up to you to decide if that's important.
I'm telling you it's important, and we heard from over 300 people that it's important. So
I'm just presenting that that the recommendations took into consideration research from other states, and that Indiana actually will not be leading this work, that we will be looking at other states, but to my own credit, taking some of the lessons learned that we have garnered from other states. So for example, I have been in touch with my counterpart, the Director of Policy for the Ohio State Board of Education, to hear about what's happening in Ohio and to hear how they could have avoided certain situations and to learn more about their situation currently around their grad pathways.
Well, again, honoring the work of the panel, we can't forget that. honoring the work of the panel and honoring the work of Dr. Ernest leading that panel. I think it's important that we know just how much time they spent, and wonder if they spent more than 10 meetings, and that's not Dr. Ernest's fault. That was the timeline that we were given. So I'm wondering if other people spent a year, 2 years, 9 months, 3 months.
I mean, I'm happy to do that research for you, but it would take doing a deep dive into each state with their state boards.
I think it's
Not public. I mean, it's not publicly reported on their websites that list their graduation.
I'm one of 11, and I think it's important.
Yes, sir.
Go back to the Indiana code
Mm-hmm.
that moved us to this point.
Yeah,
Right, so this was passed by the Indiana General Assembly.
it was.
It charged the State Board of Education to adopt pathways.
Correct.
Yeah.
And for the record, they named them pathways. I know there's been a lot of discussion around the use of the word pathways. That was not on us. That was on them. So,
So you're blaming,
yes.
but the Indiana General Assembly came up with these guidelines and expectations. From that, it went to our committee. And
It first came to you.
Right.
In July, you
And then we
voted to create a panel.
We created the panel.
Correct.
Right, and the panel came back with the recommendations.
Correct.
Right. The General Assembly could have created their own pathways, correct?
Correct.
And they did not.
Correct.
They charged us to come back and create these pathways.
Correct.
It's also possible that if we don't move forward, the General Assembly could create and adopt their own pathways, correct?
I would say that is a high likelihood.
I would rather us take control of it right now and deal with it than have it mandated by the Indiana General Assembly. And it's not perfect. But I also think it's going to be very important for us to come together on the implementation of it, around flexibility, and take full advantage of the opportunities we have in front of us. Because I agree, if there's no action, there will likely be action.
Yes.
And it may not be as favorable as we could create it on our own.
And to clarify, the options they listed, that's a May provision, so that was not options that had to be included. It was more of just of consideration.
What was the May provision?
So if you look at C, I know it's tiny. If you look at C under the statute, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's a May provision. So those did not have to be included as pathways in the recommendation. Those are just options that they listed as a consideration for the board.
So I appreciate all of the time spent with all of the public meetings and all of the hours, and I understand hundreds of hours have been invested in it. But I just think we can afford more time for our kids. And so when we look at a policy of this magnitude, it takes time. And I look at the unintended consequences of too little time, or too little reflection, or too little discussion, or too little details, and the harm that could come to the very students that we seek to benefit. And in the 6 years that I've been on the board, I think of how very rarely this many people come together in agreement from across the state. And when I look at the superintendents and the principals and teachers who are the experts in the field asking us for the respect for the extra time and asking us to fill in the blanks, I feel that they deserve that. And so when we talk about we own it, several times it's been that the board owns it, we own it, we're going to need to own this. I don't ever mind being responsible what I'm responsible for, and I'll own whatever I need to own. But once we put this into place, those people are going to own it, and those people are going to have to implement it. And if we're going to need their buy-in, we need to give them the time to be a part of some of this. And if they're asking us for some time, I know that there'll be some time problems and some time crunches. And I understand all of the questions in terms of the time constraints and stuff, but if we want buy-in and we want the fidelity of it that this plan deserves in terms of the way it should be implemented, then we need to listen. And that's
think another thing that's so important is the Pathway panel decided that they were going to extend this from next year's freshmen to next year's 8th graders. And Carrie, that's the time maybe we're talking about. And I think that was a wise move to move that back a year, to give us time to get input from the practitioners.
Are we ready for a vote?
Madam Chair, move to approve.
Second.
Call, please.
Wait a minute, can we make sure that whether we're saying yes or no, what we're voting for?
What, Tony?
Move to approve the proposal presented by the Pathways panel.
So when we say aye, we're approving what's submitted. And if we say no, we're saying more time. Or we're just saying no?
More time or no.
Okay. Sorry, Brian, I didn't even mean to put you in that spot.
That's okay. Dr. Bertram?
Yes.
Dr. Ernest?
Yes.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Mr. Hendry?
I can clarify since I just.
There's a motion on the floor to approve the panel recommendation as presented.
Yes.
Dr. McMahon?
No.
Ms. Moat?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Ms. Wicker?
No.
Dr. Yeager?
No.
Superintendent McCormick? No. Motion carries.
So now we are going up to the Department of Workforce Development CTE report.
Yes, for 5 minutes, recess.
The board is asking for a recess of 5 minutes while DWD is getting set up. So why don't you guys come on up and get set up, and we will take a 5-minute break. Perfect.
We just got a host.
Up, sir.
Grab. Tip.
I'll go through Ron's stuff.
Till our next text exchange.
Out of here.
What's that?
Out of here.
I know. I ran to the restroom. I was like,
We get board members to come up. We'll get started with DWD's presentation.
Yes, I do know. Well,
That's late people.
DWD, if you want to go ahead, we're good.
Absolutely. Thank you, Superintendent McCormick and members of the State Board. Appreciate your time in hearing this issue today. We have been prescribed by the legislature to submit recommendations to you regarding CT funding for school year 18-19. There was a report that we submitted to you last week that kind of outlines what those recommendations are. If it's the pleasure of the committee, I'll kind of walk through a little bit of the background information of how funding used to be calculated and kind of what those changes are going to be now under the new system that the General Assembly put into place. So previously, for courses that were not foundational, introductory, work-based learning, co-op, or apprenticeship, those are per pupil funded courses. There were another designation that were based on wage and demand. And the legislature funded those on a scale from 500 to 150. That graph is in the report that we allocated. So if you were a higher demand course that was teaching to those higher demand occupations or higher wage, and they were funded at a 500 level. If they were lower than that, they were somewhere between 450 and 150. In reviewing the process to make the updates that we did, we worked through the Department of Education's pathway panel work. And there were 6 different pathways that the Department of Education put into play that had post-secondary and secondary teachers, that had CTE directors, a specialist from the Department of Education from their curriculum that was administering these groups, and then industry and DWD representatives as well. So there's about 140 people between those 6 different groups that helped inform the process of the courses that we're teaching to that are career and technical education. What occupations for each one of those courses are they most related to? When they do that exercise, it helps inform us for the wage and demand labor market information that we look at to make the funding determination for how they should be valued. So if you'll look through on page 3, the legislature prescribed new funding amounts for the courses and helped simplify the wage and demand thresholds that were previously used. So there were 9 categories that were used. They have now reduced that to 3, those 3 being high value, moderate value, and less than moderate value. And those associated funding for high value is $680, moderate value is $400, and less than moderate value at $200. I do also want to note that on the per pupil courses, they did make some changes. For apprenticeship, co-op, and work-based learning, those were previously funded at $300. The legislature did change that to $150 on per pupil basis.
The classes that'll count for box 2 of what we just passed were cut in half.
By the legislature, that is correct.
Okay.
What did you just say?
Enrolled Act now, 198.
Correct.
The courses that really are the vehicle to box 2 that many of our schools use to hit box 2, those funds have been cut in half.
Why is that?
Our legislators decided last legislative session their value, I guess, is deemed not as high as it once was. So although we see it as important enough that it's a requirement, the legislators cut all of those. The co-ops, it's the work-based learning, it's your apprenticeships, those funds have been cut in half. I just wanted to.
And for the agency's perspective, I mean, those are critical courses that have tremendous value, but I mean, that was a decision.
Speak up, I can't hear you.
That was a decision by the General Assembly. I mean, it was not us. We are pushing co-op, work-based learning, and apprenticeship models.
So where are you going now? You're going to try to get that re-implemented, get that money back with the legislature? Where are you now?
Well, they come back here at the beginning of January, and that'll be an open forum for everyone to, voice their concerns.
No, I'm asking what you're going to do.
We have an agency bill, and that'll be authored by legislators at that time. We'll certainly consider.
Sorry, you got to get into the mic.
We will certainly consider those options. It is a non-budgetary year, in fairness, though, and this was a budgetary item. But the legislature is certainly willing to bring forth those kinds of issues. So, are there any other questions on that?
So we just passed something that is going to require more money, and we just had our money cut in half. Am I confused with that?
So that's one aspect. So what I was talking about before, on the courses that do look at demand and wage data that we have helped supply, and the courses are all listed in the back of the report and how that change is going to unfold. Those courses have gone from a max ceiling of $500 per credit hour per pupil to $680. So there is an opportunity within the CT space for more money to be going to the schools. And that is actually in the proposal. Based on the methodology.
What kids sign up for.
Depending on what they sign up for, right. And this is also taking into consideration current enrollments. So based on the methodology that we did in changing some of the funding designations, that would be an increase based on today's enrollments had our methodology been in place by about $3 to $5 million.
By having categories, as we have them when we just adopted Category 2, now all students will have to meet one of the 3 requirements. That's what was cut.
That was cut by the legislature.
Other pathways in Section 3, in many cases.
Sure. Right. And some of the CT courses that take into consideration wage and demand that get to those 680, 400, 200 levels do have work-based learning components to them. But there are specific designations if you are in an apprenticeship program, a co-op, or et cetera, that those are specifically designated within our systems and funded at a rate that is set by the General Assembly. So in looking to the back page, this shows the difference based on the statutory amounts that the General Assembly put into place, and then also the data that we ran on our end in collaboration with the Department of Education and also the pathway groups that helped inform the courses and what occupations were being taught to. Absolutely.
So it doesn't talk to the 3 courses that are being funded in the 8th grade. I assuming those have not changed because it doesn't speak to those. So for the Introduction to Engineering, I think what is it, PCC and maybe an ag class. So those are the 3 that we have told schools and they are planning on funding. So I'm assuming with it being absent in here, that just continues as is?
Yeah, there were no changes made there.
Okay, so the middle school, the 8th grade courses are not being touched.
Correct, and that is statutory.
Okay.
And PCC is the majority of those enrollments.
I just want to make sure because it didn't talk about that.
Correct.
And so when you guys do this from DWD, from an Indiana focus, how do you, I know Commission of Higher Ed just told us that wage and demand is about the same. They don't put any more importance on one or the other, and it's a philosophical, why would we worry about it? Do you guys approach it the same way when you're determining these amounts that wage and demand are equal, like high wage, high demand, those are equal, or do you put weight on one more than the other?
So it's actually a decile system, and Fran Valentine is our Director of Research and Analysis. I brought her to answer that very question, and the methodology is listed in the report, but she'll be able to talk about the different variables that we look at within demand and wage as we assess that from a statewide perspective.
Okay.
Hi, good afternoon. Our demand ranking methodology is not just a high wage, high demand ranking system. It's a decile ranking system that incorporates multiple factors beyond just the wage and the demand. The demand factor is weighted twice. We then look at percent growth, percent change. So you can tell it's very heavily focused on the demand of the occupation and how fast it is growing. The wage is a component. We also use real-time labor market information to understand what employers are asking for in the field. And we look at this, again, within a decile ranking system, looking at both our short-term projections and our long-term projections, and then coming up with an average between the two to assign a ranking. We do review these quarterly, so we are updating these inputs as they change, and updating the real-time labor market information quarterly.
Indiana's Department of Workforce Development puts twice as much on demand,
Correct.
Less on wage earning. Is that normal in others? I mean, is that the norm in other states? I don't know if that's even a good question or a fair question.
Yes.
Is that usually the way it's done?
It depends. We modeled our ranking system after Louisiana. They do double weight wage. So here in Indiana, we do things a little bit differently than that. Otherwise, the scoring mechanism is essentially the same. But we did want to focus on jobs that are in demand that we need to fill that may not be high wage jobs. We do have a wage rule in place, however, so that a low wage occupation that is high demand would not go beyond a certain threshold. So we would keep jobs that are, as an example, a cashier or an occupation that would be very low wage, but we do have a high level of churn or demand for that occupation from being used to affect policy decisions.
So my question is to get this in alignment. So we're chasing Nevada, Tennessee, some of those that we're saying in Switzerland. So go look at these models, and do they do the double demand model in Tennessee that everybody's saying we got to mirror, and in Nevada everybody's saying we have to mirror? Do they do the same thing that we do?
I am not sure if they do the same double demand weight or not, to be honest. There is an initiative right now to collect all of the different criteria that states are using through one of our labor market information consortium groups. I'd be happy to follow up with them and find out if we can provide more comprehensive analysis on
I'm just
that.
watching, we're following the trends, and obviously, our last vote, we're following the educational trends of those states. Are we watching the funding trends of those states?
Sure.
So I was just curious to see, are we mirroring that? Are we going rogue on that? And I'm not being critical.
No, sure.
I'm just asking.
Yeah, I'll definitely provide more information. I would say this is, when we began this process, we were one of a few states that were looking at doing this sort of demand ranking system, but since then, over the past year and a half or so, it is becoming the trend, especially with some of the changes that we're seeing in the WIOA funding mechanisms that we are aligning our resources with in-demand occupations. This is definitely the move that most states will be making. I think some of our decision-making around this to double weight demand would be to make sure that we are meeting the needs of employers and meeting the needs of a wide array of occupations that are not limited to just high-wage careers, because there are many occupations that do provide a very livable wage that are in demand that we do need to fill in the state. And we wanted to make sure that we are capturing kind of that myriad of education attainment levels as well. So as an example, we can have a 5-flame occupation, so that would be the greatest demand occupation, that would range in scope from someone maybe working in a construction field to someone who is working as a specialist as a physician. So we do have this ranking system in place to provide, again, that range of occupations so that people who are at different education attainment levels and who have different capacities at different points in their life can choose pathways within that demand rank. You're welcome.
High demand and low wage.
Cashier would be one. Food service would be another.
Cashier is not in here, right?
No. Well, we rank all occupations, so yes, you could find out of the 800 occupations it is included, but as a funded, no. It would have to align to a CTE course. So unless that outcome was being taught to within a CTE course, no. I will say that with our crosswalk, the occupations that are included can be broad. So, we followed a federal model to start, and then as Nick explained, it went through quite a vetting process to determine what are the occupations that tie. So there could be 1-flame occupations or 2-flame occupations included in that pathway. So that could affect some of the overall course funding, but all in all, these are, higher.
And I know
funded.
the answer to this question, but I'm interested from a supply and demand perspective. Or we meet that demand. Have that imbalance. What drives that then? I mean, if players are looking and say, I don't have enough people.
The answer is it depends. There are economists that have theories that it could be related to uncertainty around healthcare, that there could be places where they may increase benefits rather than add a wage increase because they can take those benefits away should they need to. I think it's a pretty complex question.
I'm wondering if wages go up, does that increase supply?
It can. It can help. It can bring people into the workforce that maybe aren't attracted to that position.
So in some ways, then there's an artificial suppression of wages.
Could be.
Naturally, you would just say, I'm going to try to attract people I need in the workforce I need.
Correct.
I was just curious. One of the last question. When you look at courses that are, in full disclosure, I'm going to ask this. Look at a pathway. Engineering design. Mm-hmm. The fact that a course is titled Introduction, permanent of where it's.
I may let Nick answer that question.
So when we worked with the Department of Education, depends where that course is in the pathway. So if it is the first course in that pathway, it is funded at the introductory level, which is $300, and that is statutorily defined.
So it would take, if it's not a required sequence, principles engineering, which is funded at a higher rate, but students could take principles engineering first or last. Mm-hmm. As to how that then is sequenced around. Also, even if you're in a sequence, it's a first course, and they can't take the second course till they have first course, we're also trying to incentivize students pathway.
Right. Right.
It's not just PL2W, it's really could be any pathway like that, so.
Absolutely. And there's foundational courses too, and those are statutorily defined on when they're funded, but where those courses fall at with the prerequisites that they have and the grade level that those students would traditionally take that was where those decisions fell. And we're consistent with how they had previously been funded in the past. And a majority of the courses I do want to mention, and talking about the methodology real quickly, it has been nationally vetted and validated. The Indiana Business Research Center has been in support of the methodology. So this isn't something that was just created by the Department of Workforce Development. We're the only state doing this. A lot of states are moving this because we do have finite resources, and we need to try to align those around what our state's greatest needs are. And that was one of the reasons that we had constructed and put this methodology into place to help be more targeted in our approach. Specifically looking at the course designations, I do want to mention of those that fall into that high value category, 50% of the courses that we evaluated on a demand and wage basis fell into that high value. So a majority of our courses are going to be at that 680 mark, about another 25%, 30% of that were in that moderate value, and then a lesser 15 to 20% fell in that lower threshold. So I do think it's a tribute to what is currently being taught, that they are teaching to what we recognize as state needs, and our CT directors in the schools that are teaching these courses are recognizing that and stepping up to the plate, and the additional funding that the General Assembly leverage ideally will help support them. And with this policy in place, they will be receiving more money, assuming our enrollments in the courses that we saw this year maintain or increase next year.
Promising that we heard from the Commission of Higher Ed, and we heard from our legislators yesterday that did say that those funds, everything should be aligned. And so I hope during the legislative session we can revisit, and I know this isn't you, but we'll sure use your help to revisit the apprenticeship and those work-based learning and some of those that are going to be the vehicle for that box 2. It's going to be critical that we revisit all that so we can look at the funds that are going to be available to pull off a mandate. So that's just, I know that's not you, but I know that the DWD can chime into that. So given that and hearing what we heard from Commissioner Lubbers, she mentioned apprenticeship specifically, and the 2 legislators yesterday, I think we'll be in good shape.
Absolutely. We're in strong support of those initiatives the governor put out his plan, as I'm sure many of you are familiar, and apprenticeships are a key component of that, creating an office at the Department of Workforce Development. So, we look forward to those future conversations with your office as we did last session with 198, and we'll certainly be a proponent of that.
I'd be really disappointed if those didn't get increased, given it's everybody's priority. So at this point, do we have any more discussion before we take a vote? Any questions? Do we have a motion to accept the Department of the Workforce Development CTE report?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Dr. Bertram? Yes.
Dr. Hess?
Yes.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrick? Dr. McMahon?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Ms. Wicker?
Yes.
Dr. Gator?
Yes.
Superintendent?
Yes. Consent agenda. We are all over the place on this agenda. So consent agenda, there are 3 items, A through F, appeals, approval of the 2018 summer school program, and 18-19 course title and description. Do we have a motion?
Move to approve. Second.
Discussion. Roll call, please.
Dr. Bertram?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. There are no adjudications, so now we're going to skip down to discussions and reports for a very, very brief presentation on assessment. Dr. Flores, although I think you're a brilliant person.
Okay, I only had 2 slides for today. So the first I'll cover briefly is just a reminder that we do have our retest windows open right now. So far this week, we've assessed about 80,000 tests so far successfully. Our team is working to mitigate any issues with that. And then the other thing that I wanted to touch on is just a reminder that our alternate assessment RFP submissions are coming in on Friday. I know 2 of the board members are assisting with that review process, so we're moving that process along as well.
Great presentation.
Yes. Mine's going to be shorter. I was asked to give you an update on ESSA. I don't have much of an update. We're in the 120-day review period for ESSA. We are waiting to receive feedback from the Department of Education, and they are indicating that we will get feedback soon, but we're unsure exactly when that will happen. We will work quickly to respond once we receive the feedback.
Is there anything in the ESSA plan that is misaligned with what happened today?
We'll have to do revisions in some of the sections, yes, based on the votes taken today.
Patrick, I have a process question. We're going to get a written report from U.S. Department of Education first. Is that correct?
Leanne, are we receiving a written report from the Department of Education? Yeah.
So that written report is a public document. Would you be sure to send it to all of us?
Absolutely.
And then the written report is followed by a conference call with USDOE to negotiate, and that's their term, not mine, negotiate the conditions or the celebrations. And I just want to be sure that, question is, who's going to be involved in that negotiation conference call with USDOE?
I'll defer to Leanne to answer this one.
Well, that will certainly be Dr. McCormick and members of our cabinet. And then I know the governor's office asked if they could hear some of those conversations as well.
Okay, so we'd have some board staff in there, and I think that's really important that we have collaboration, at least one person from board staff to be there as we move on collaboratively.
Do you know the entire ESSA process has been very collaborative, and we will continue moving forward that way.
I think the negotiation process is it's really important because there might be some things listed in there that can be clarified to the point where they'll be fine with our response. And I think the report is a positive report. But every state has those little things that are a little different, and that's what makes ESSA rich. And that negotiation process is important to explain unique things about Indiana that they may not have been fully flushed out in the report. I want to be sure everyone is still involved and we're all on the same page.
Several of our section on accountability, many of the specificities won't be able to be addressed until rulemaking closes. And so I anticipate that if they approve our ESSA plan, it will be based on conditions of how that final rulemaking, what that looks like. And so I don't want you to think that once we get our feedback that we're going to probably have a fully approved plan, because we do have that rulemaking that will last until summer.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions for Patrick or for Leanne? Next item on the agenda is a motion to adjourn. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.